Well, say, how's your day going? What are you up to? Any plans for this evening and indeed for the rest of the week? And also, we'll be getting stuck into this news from the NHS, where Wes Streeting is calling on the public to give their opinions on the future of the organisation. Some people have suggested, and by the way, these public comments have been made available online for the whole world to see. Some of you, not sure who, but some of you have suggested things such as mandatory euthanasia to clear hospital beds, an NHS TV channel for patients to access physiotherapy exercises and rehab, and even NHS-branded medical gear, including plasters, first aid kits, so on and so on. Would you buy some NHS-branded plasters? Would they make a good stocking filler for Christmas? Let us know. gbnews.com/your say. A big 3 hours coming up, but first, your news headlines with Katie Bowen.
Ben, thank you. It's just gone 3 o'clock. These are your latest headlines from the GB newsroom. The Prime Minister has asked the British public to share their experiences and ideas to help fix the NHS, adding there's a need for the health service to move towards more digital systems. Meanwhile, Health Secretary Wes Streeting said the NHS is going through what is objectively the worst crisis in its history, with some patients receiving what he described as a death sentence because of the service's failings. Sir Keir Starmer and Mr Streeting were giving a speech in East London this morning as they launched the party's health service consultation about the institution's next decade. The Prime Minister said NHS workers deserve a lot better than what has happened over the last 14 years.
What we want to achieve is a situation where we reimagine the NHS, make it fit for the future, and where in 10, 20, 30 years people look back at what we did and say that was the government, that government of 2024, that Labour government, that made sure the NHS is fit for the next 75 years. And we want you to be part of that, not just because you're working within the NHS, but of course because you will have the best ideas.
A senator has confronted the King in Australia's parliament, shouting, "This is not your land and you are not my king." The incident happened after His Majesty finished an address at Australia's Parliament House on the second official day of his engagements in the country. Lydia Thorpe interrupted the ceremony in the capital city of Canberra by shouting for about a minute before she was escorted away by security.
You are a genocide! This is not your land! This is not your land! You are not my king! You are not our king!
The ceremony was then concluded without any reference to the incident, and the royal couple proceeded to meet the public who'd waited outside the building to greet them. Their Majesties are on a 6-day tour of the country. They've also visited the Australian National Botanic Gardens this afternoon. It's the King's first visit to the country since becoming monarch. A 25-year-old woman has pleaded guilty to assault after throwing a milkshake at Reform UK leader Nigel Farage during the general election campaign. Victoria Thomas Bowen appeared in court this morning, charged with assault by beating and criminal damage. Mr Farage, now Clacton MP, was doused as he left the Moon and Starfish Wetherspoon pub in Essex seaside town on June the 4th. He'd earlier addressed supporters at a rally during the general election campaign. Robert Jenrick has vowed to crack down on grooming gangs, saying gang members should face whole-life prison sentences. The Tory leadership candidate says there needs to be changes to the sentencing guidelines and impose whole-life sentences on members of grooming gangs, which would mean convicted offenders would never be released from jail. Currently, the maximum sentence for grooming under the 2003 Sexual Offences Act carries a minimum of 14 years.
What I want to see are mandatory life sentences for these despicable predators, so that you're not out in 14 years, as the current law suggests, or less, but actually you're never out of prison again. I want those of these predators who are not British citizens to be removed from our country with compulsory deportations. And the public officials who turn a blind eye for fear of racism or community relations, I want them to be prosecuted and barred from working in the public sector ever again.
Elsewhere, more than 1,000 extra prisoners are set to be freed early this week as the government puts the latest stage of its plan to ease jail overcrowding into action. Tomorrow, around 1,100 inmates will be released as the policy is expanded to those serving sentences of 5 years or more. It follows the first release of around 1,700 prisoners from jails across England and Wales last month. This came after Justice Secretary Shabana Mahmood announced plans in July to temporarily cut the proportion of sentences inmates must serve behind bars from 50% to 40%. As the Ministry of Justice said, overcrowding had pushed jails to the point of collapse. To the US, at least 5 new civil lawsuits have been filed against Sean Diddy Combs in a federal court in New York. 2 men and 3 women accuse the hip-hop mogul of sexually assaulting them at various parties in LA, New York and Las Vegas. The youngest plaintiff was 13 at the time of the alleged incident. Mr. Combs remains in custody. He's separately facing federal charges of sex trafficking and racketeering, which he denies. His lawyers recently dismissed the flurry of lawsuits as clear attempts to garner publicity. More than 100 flood warnings remain in place across the UK today following Storm Ashley. The storm has battered parts of the country with hurricane-force winds and torrential rain as more flights and trains are cancelled. The New Road cricket ground in Worcester was completely submerged in water. Rail and flight delays continue due to 80-mile-per-hour winds as the UK is put on high alert for flooding. Those are your latest GB News headlines for now. I'm Katie Bowen. Now it's back to Ben.
Thanks, Katie. Now, the government has launched a public consultation on the future of the health service in England, which is being labelled the biggest national conversation about the future of the NHS since its birth. Members of the public will be able to share their views online until the start of next year, and some have already leaked this morning. I'm not sure if it was intentional. We'll endeavour to find out, but some comments have been made available for the whole world to see, including suggestions that the NHS should give away free cinema tickets and sell NHS-branded plasters and first aid kits to try and raise some money for the coffers. Amongst the government's other plans to transform the NHS are turning it into a neighbourhood health service and fining patients for missed appointments. Health Secretary Wes Streeting could also introduce plans to store your private health records in a central NHS database. Well, I'm joined now in the studio by GBNews political correspondent Olivia Utley, and also with us is Kevin Schofield, the political editor of HuffPost UK. Good afternoon to you both. Olivia, let's go to you first. This is a rallying cry, it's being described as, from the government, from Wes Streeting, to reform the NHS. But what does that look like, reform?
Well, I think that part of the reason why Labour is doing this, and doing this now specifically, is because for weeks and weeks now we've heard about the budget and how it's all going to be doom and gloom, how taxes are going to rise, how we're going to go through a dark time before we can reach the brighter times. And Labour now has to remind people it's not all doom and gloom. You know, there is a reason why you voted for Labour in the first place. And of course, on the NHS, they're normally on quite firm territory. Even during the election campaign, Wes Streeting was coming up with some pretty bold, radical ideas for NHS reform. And Jeremy Hunt, in his speech when he won his seat in Guildford, said that he thought that perhaps Labour would be in a better position than the Tories to reform the NHS because the NHS isn't quite so toxic an issue for the Labour Party. So what does this reform look like? Well, we don't have very much detail because it's all going to be a consultation. A cynic might say that the can is being kicked down the road a bit with this because we won't even hear what the 10-year plan is going to involve for 6 months, and then, of course, it will take 10 years to complete. Wes Streeting has talked about digitising the NHS. I mean, that seems like a logical, sensible step. It has been tried in the past and has come up against all sorts of difficulties, mainly because of just how ancient some of these NHS digital systems are. He wants to get everything on one central database. Again, makes a lot of logical sense. I think lots of our viewers will have had the experience of going to a hospital appointment and finding that the hospital has no record of any of the conversations that they've had with their GPs, and it wastes a lot of NHS time. There's also been talk, although Wes Streeting is now kind of talking this down a little bit, of fining patients who miss their GP appointments. Again, that seems like a relatively logical step because missed GP appointments waste £1.2 billion a year. 1 in 15 GP appointments are missed. The issue is when it's been talked about before, policymakers have agreed that it would just involve so much bureaucracy actually getting the fines out to those people. Streeting also talks about moving care from hospitals into the communities. Again, something which has been tried in various ways before and isn't quite as easy as it might sound. So nothing particularly new from the government today, but perhaps after this 6-month consultation, there'll be all sorts of radical ideas to put in
Yes,
place.
and I must say, Kevin, they are I guess, slightly ambitious, saying it's a 10-year plan, because that obviously counts on the fact they'll win another election, of course. But simple things such as fining people for missed GP appointments, that seems rather a good idea, and I think they do it in France, don't they? And there was talk some months back where we could do it here and the payment would be linked to benefits, so it would really encourage people not to waste GPs' time.
Yeah, I mean, Olivia's right. It is something that's been tried or suggested at least before, and you're right, it does happen in other countries. However, when it's been suggested before, there's always been quite a heavy pushback, and in the final analysis, the government of the day, be it Conservative or Labour, has tended to shy away from it. And as Olivia says, it doesn't sound as though it's something that West Streeting is willing at this stage to press
What's
ahead
the resistance
with.
to it, do you think?
Well, I think, as Olivia also said, it's quite bureaucratic, chasing people for the money. But, the argument for it are quite persuasive as well. It would focus the mind. If you think it's going to cost you, say, 30, 50 quid for not turning up, then you're going to turn up, you would think, because it does cost an awful lot of money and it wastes GPs' time at a time when people are struggling already to get appointments. And if some people manage to get an appointment and then don't use it, then you'd think there should be some sort of sanction for that.
What do you make of these ideas that have been, I guess, leaked to you, Olivia, as well, leaked online? So we've got the NHS should stop spending £40 million a year on diversity. They should do the branded plasters and first aid kits. Somebody said, make Sir Tony Blair the head of NHS England. And in their recommendation online, they said, we must urgently appoint Sir Tony Blair as head of NHS England, along with Mr Milburn, as his reforms are. Sizeable salaries must follow. This pairing, after all, produced the highest NHS approval ratings in post-war history, a too often forgotten fact amidst a wave of lazy Iraq finger washing. Olivia, what do you reckon about that?
Well, it sounds like something which might be up Keir Starmer's street. He does seem to like to evoke Tony Blair's name whenever he gets the opportunity. If these are the sorts of ideas that the public are coming up with, though, I'm not sure that this 10-year plan for the NHS is going to be quite as brilliant as Wes Treating hoped. There are some people suggesting that, putting it just in the hands of the public suggests, does Labour not have any ideas itself? Does seem a little bit strange when they have had a lot of years in opposition to work out exactly what they want to do with the NHS. All they seem to have come up with is a public consultation plus a few ideas which have been rehashed in various forms. That said, I think that Wes Treating, he's made all the right noises so far. He was pretty zealous on day one. He did manage to end those doctors' strikes almost straight away. And as Jeremy Hunt says, it is possible that Labour ends up being in a better position to reform the NHS than the Conservatives because it's a less politically toxic issue for them. So maybe it'll go well.
Kevin, isn't the solution, well, I'd argue the solution is quite obvious to a lot of people, not least to a lot of our viewers, which is make the NHS means tested. Why should somebody earning, say, 100k a year have access to all the milk and honey the NHS offers when they could afford to go private? Should there not be different bands and thresholds of access to the NHS depending on how much you earn? Why should somebody earning 100, 150k a year be clogging up, say, physiotherapy appointments when old Doris, who's struggling to see a physio for months and months on end, can't access one?
No, I mean, I think you'll find that a lot of people earning that type of salary, when faced with a huge NHS waiting list, probably would just dip into their own pocket. They might well have health insurance through their employer. They probably will go into the private sector. The whole point of the NHS, though, is that it is free at the point of need. It is a universal service. It would be a very brave politician, Labour or Conservative, who suggested any sort of means test. I mean, you've seen what it's like. They've tried to means test winter fuel payments, and that is already, I mean, that's controversial enough, and it's caused them a massive headache. I think any party willing or wanting to bring forward such a radical proposal would need to put it to the country in a general election, and I think they would probably lose.
Well, I don't think it's that radical, though. I mean, you are protecting the people who need the NHS most, which is why it was founded in the first place. It's for people who, who are vulnerable, who are perhaps, not earning as much or not working at all. Why should the high earners have access to all the thrills of the NHS? Whenever you mention such a suggestion to people who, I guess from the left of the argument, it's met with such a cultish response. I think we need to just move away from this idea that the NHS should be untouchable in terms of part privatisation. Otherwise, I don't see what the solution is in terms of reform.
Well, I don't actually know of any Conservative politicians actually that seriously put forward this idea either. Every Conservative health sector that there's ever been, in fact, the Conservatives have run the NHS for a larger chunk of its existence than Labour have because they've won more elections. They've never gone anywhere near. Margaret Thatcher went nowhere near trying to privatise the NHS. It's just, as I say, it's politically toxic. It's known in this country, it's referred to as almost like a national religion, the NHS. And I think, as I say, it'd be interesting if a mainstream party was to go into an election saying, like, this is what we're going to do. What do you think of it?
Yeah, well, I mean,
I don't think it would play very well with the general public.
Well, I guess the difference is between, say, Maggie Thatcher's days is that population explosion, you know, tens of millions of people who are here, who weren't there before, putting pressure on the NHS. What about this one for an idea? Maximum BMI for nurses to set an example to patients.
There was also one I saw with maximum BMI for politicians as well. The politicians should get weighed every month to see if they practice what they preach. I'm interested to see if West Streeting takes that one on board. I'm not sure he will. But yeah, I think it's safe to say that quite a lot of these suggestions aren't wholly serious. But if you actually go through, as I have this afternoon, they're a tiny minority, although people like me will still write about them because they're pretty funny, to be fair. OK, right, yeah, plenty more of those to come, hopefully. Olivia, should we talk about Labour's, I'm calling it their sort of nightmare on Reeve Street tax onslaught in the budget in just a couple of weeks. What are we expecting? There's reports today that they're going to be targeting high earners, anyone earning over 100k a year, with even more blows to their earnings. I mean, they're exempt from the personal allowance anyway, aren't they? So arguably they already do take a whack.
Yeah, so Rachel Reeves has confirmed in the last couple of days that income tax thresholds are going to continue to be frozen. We sort of knew that was going to happen anyway. Anyone who was going to unfreeze their income tax thresholds would have mentioned it in the run-up to the general election. They've been frozen for a long, long time now. I think it's pretty much a decade they've been frozen for, obviously against a backdrop of very, very high inflation. That does mean that all sorts of people who were never supposed to be in the top tax bracket, you know, teachers, nurses, etc., have ended up being pulled into it. And obviously some of the higher earners, those on 100k and more, suffer the most, if you like, from that. There is also talk that Reeves is going to raise capital gains tax, though there have been warnings against that from the IFS, very well-respected independent think tank, who've said that actually if you bump capital gains up to something like 39%, which was one option which was being aired during the general election, you end up with people just not selling their assets because they don't want to be hit with that punitive level of tax. And because capital gains is levelled at really such a small number of people, I think something like 12,000 people pay a fifth of all capital gains tax in the country, you don't need many people to be changing their behaviour before you see a really big impact on tax receipts. You know, there's all sorts of ways where some of the ideas which Rachel Reeves has brought forward sort of ideologically sound like they would go down really well with Labour voters and seem to make sense. But at the moment, policymakers are looking in granular detail at how some of these decisions, capital gains being a good example, how people's behaviour, how changes in people's behaviour could result in these policies just backfiring altogether. So I suspect what's going to happen is actually the budget isn't going to be quite as dramatic as we're all expecting. Some of these measures that will probably be scaled back in quite a big way.
Kevin, Labour have been quite tricky with their language with this working people definition. We still don't know what a working person is. I think Sir Keir Starmer suggested he might be one, despite his vast wealth. They're increasing, or rumoured to be increasing anyway, things such as fuel tax, the fuel levy. I mean, do working people not drive cars?
No, absolutely. That's the mistake that they made, really. They've boxed themselves in. So the language that they used before the election was basically aimed at winning the election. So that got them over that particular hurdle. However, now the rubber hits the road, to use another motoring metaphor, and they have to explain exactly what they meant by working people. And thus far, no minister that I've seen anyway has come up with a understandable or realistic answer for what a working person is. Surely anyone that works is a working person. Yeah. What they were getting at was someone on a low to middle income, I think. But
so that would exclude six-figure earners, would it? They're not working people.
I guess, but I'm just guessing here. And the problem is, as I say, they box themselves in by saying we won't put up VAT, we won't put up national insurance, we won't put up income tax. Well, you know, that kind of narrows your options, really. And yeah, all these other taxes, you know, can in some way affect working people, not least fuel duty. So I think they're going to have a tough sell on the day of the budget, because everyone's taxes are going to go up. I think that's generally accepted, one way or another. And then people are going to turn around and say, well, hang on a minute, you said you weren't going to put up our taxes. So going to have some very tough questions to answer.
OK, we'll see. The days tick on the big budget. Is it next week, Olivia? 31st?
It is 30th, I think.
30th, there we go. Yeah, it's Wednesday next week, so we will find out. As you said, Olivia, I reckon it'll be a case where we've had months of speculation and stories and so-called leaks. Yeah, we'll see. Olivia Utley, Kevin Schofield, thank you for joining me. Plenty more coverage on all those stories on our website, gbnews.com. I was going to say /your say, but just go to gbnews.com, far simpler. You've helped to make it the fastest growing national news website in the country, by the way. All you generous viewers, giving your time and your energy to click onto those stories and across our social media channels, thank you very much. We keep growing. Great news. Time now, bit of a gear change for the Great British Giveaway, and the clock is ticking on getting your entry in as lines are closing this Friday. Make sure you don't miss out on your chance to win a whopping £36,000 in tax-free cash. Here's all the details you need to make it yours.
This is the final week to grab your chance to win a whopping £36,000 cash in the Great British Giveaway. That's like having £3,000 each month for an entire year. Extra cash in your bank account that you can do whatever you like with. Make sure you don't miss out. Get your entry in now. Just one entry could make you the winner. For another chance to win £36,000 in tax-free cash, text cash to 63232. One entry costs £2 plus one standard network rate message, or text bonus to 63232. 5 entries cost £5 plus one standard network rate message. You can enter online at gbnews.com/win. Entries start from just £2, or post your name and number to GB08 PO Box 8690 Derby DE1 9TT. UK only. Entrance must be 18 or over. Lines close 5 p.m. this Friday. Please check the closing time if listening or watching on demand. Good luck.
Best of luck to you on that. Coming up on the show, we'll be discussing Tory leadership candidate Robert Jenrick's plans to crack down on grooming gangs. He's calling for whole life sentences for those who commit such offences. Do you agree? Let me know. gbnews.com/your say. I'm Ben Leo on GB News, Britain's news channel. Back in a tick.
I'm Arlene Foster on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Nightmare commute? Kick it up a gear with GB News Radio. You can listen online and on DAB+ and on the GB News app. We're also on TuneIn and the Radio Player apps. From the school run to rush hour, get revved up with GB News Radio. We are the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News Breakfast, every day from 6 a.m.
You could, if you're getting a bit bored later on and you've got some free time, tune in to Friends. Remember that?
It's on somewhere in the world all the time.
Probably one of those
incredible.
Obscure TV channels.
It's a big anniversary today, because apparently today was 30 years ago, was when it first hit the screens.
In 1994. Just before, or just after I was born, 89 me. The show ran for 10 series, becoming one of the most popular sitcoms of all time, and it scored numerous accolades, including 62 Primetime Emmy nominations. Joining us now in the studio to talk everything Friends and the big anniversary is showbiz reporter Steph Tetchy and my friend as well.
Happy Friendsniversary, guys. Yes, today is quite a monumental day for one of the most incredible sitcoms to ever hit our TV screens.
That it's on somewhere in the world.
There's millions of people around the world who are watching reruns, watching either streaming of Friends, and it doesn't get boring for people. I think, 30 years later, just that it's such a simple concept. 6 New Yorkers just following their lives and their friendships. It proved a hit with loads of viewers worldwide.
The casting was superb.
It was so incredible, and the thing is, these were all fresh faces at the time. It wasn't like they picked people who were at the top of the game then. And I think it was such a hit with viewers is because they became our friends as well over the years. But obviously today is played with a bit of poignancy because, there is one friend that is missing. And the creators of the show, Martha Kaufman and David Crane, saying that today is a bit fraught for both the cast because of Matthew Perry's passing. And he was known as one of the funniest friends, as most people would describe him as. And so today is kind of marred with sadness.
GB News, the People's Channel.
We're proud to be GB News, the People's Channel. And as you know, we always love to hear your views. Now, there's a new way of getting in touch with us at gbnews.com/yoursay. By commenting, you can be part of a live conversation and join our GB News community. You can even talk to me, Bev Turner, or any of the members of the GB News family.
I'm Nana Acquia. This is GB News, Britain's news channel.
Hello, welcome back. I'm Ben Leo, covering for Martin Daubney this week as he enjoys himself on a well-deserved holiday. Lots of emails flying in on the NHS. Some of you praising the NHS. Of course, it has its merits in places. Sean, you said, I had an MRI at 10:30 p.m. and recently received a phone call at 3 a.m. saying I needed to be in hospital and an ambulance was on its way. I suppose it depends where you live on the level of service. Good to hear, Sean. Anthony, you said, if you charge people for missing appointments, then we should be paid also. The public should be paid for the amount of cancelled appointments we receive from the NHS. And David, you said the NHS should be for British people not caring for everyone coming to the UK. They should be covered by insurance until they've contributed to the country. I've had mixed service from the NHS. I needed surgery for a sports injury some years ago, and it took me 4 weeks to see a GP, a further, I think it was 8 weeks then to see a consultant. I was then referred to physiotherapy, which it took about, I think it was 4 or 5 months to have my first physiotherapy session on the NHS. And all they did was say, lift your leg up and down 10 times a day and some other bizarre exercises. And they said it was a groin strain. It didn't work. And I was lucky enough to go private through my old work. And within 1 week, I'd seen a GP, a consultant, and the next week I was on the surgery table having surgery on my hip. And the contrast in service was, it was amazing. The NHS is great for cancer treatments, of course. I've had lots of great stories about people receiving superb cancer treatment. And I think generally we're quite lucky to have A&E. Depends where you are. I think the waiting times down where I live are up to 10 hours at times, which isn't great. But other areas of the country, I have seen only a couple of hours and they're bang on target. But keep those comments coming in. gbnews.com/yoursay. Elsewhere, the Conservative leadership hopeful Robert Jenrick is on a mission to win over party members. He says he'll give child grooming gangs full life sentences and automatically deport non-British offenders. And that's after GB News revealed that a Rotherham grooming gang survivor was told she couldn't call for her abusers to be deported in her victim impact statement at a sentencing in Sheffield Crown Court last month. Well, let's get the latest now from GB News national reporter Charlie Peters on this, who's been doing some sterling work in recent months on the Rotherham cases. Charlie, is this music to the ears for the grooming gang victims you've been speaking to, Robert Jenrick's comments?
Yeah, lots of positivity, and it comes also as we reveal today that one of the perpetrators from that Sheffield Crown Court case last month, Mohammed Ammar, who was sentenced to 14 years imprisonment for 2 counts of indecent assault on an 11-year-old girl 20 years ago, is now appealing his sentence. So on the same day that Robert Jenrick calls for stronger prison sentences, indeed whole-life tariffs for grooming gang perpetrators, one of them is appealing a sentence for abusing a child. But he also made several other demands, Robert Jenrick, and we spoke to him this morning. He said that he wants the whole-life tariff, he wants a blacklist for public sector officials who failed to deal with this crisis so they can't work in the public sector again. He's also called for that automatic deportation. There are several offenders who've been found guilty, who are foreign nationals, but over a decade on, are still resisting deportation due to the European Convention of Human Rights, claiming that their right to a family life, of all things, would be denied. He's also demanded a national memorial in Rotherham to represent all the survivors across the country. A GB News investigation has found some 50 different towns and cities where this type of abuse has taken place. And he's also gone further to say that all offenders should be tagged upon release so that no other survivor has to endure what so many have already, which is seeing their perpetrator in the streets, in the supermarket, in the towns where they were abused. Here's what Robert Jenrick had to say this morning on the channel.
What we need is action now to try to eliminate this, because only a fool would believe this isn't happening today on our streets somewhere in our country. What I want to see are mandatory life sentences for these despicable predators, so that you're not out in 14 years, as the current law suggests, or less, but actually you're never out of prison again. I want those of these predators who are not British citizens to be removed from our country with compulsory deportations. And the public officials who turn a blind eye for fear of racism or community relations, I want them to be prosecuted and barred from working in the public sector ever again.
Well, Robert Jenrick said that this was a moral stain on our country. He pointed to the several cases that we knew of where public inquiries and investigations had found thousands of victims in Rochdale, in Rotherham, in Telford. But he also pointed to the fact that this has covered the entire country. And he referred to Suella Braverman launching that National Crime Agency-led national task force last year, which has made over 500 arrests after a GB News campaign called for it to be founded. But he said that more needed to be done. We asked him this morning, are you concerned that voters and victims won't trust you? Because many of the things you're calling for, Suella Braverman and that government last year also said they'd put through, but many of those changes were scrapped due to the election preventing some of the changes being brought in. He said that he was committed to these changes either way.
OK, Charlie Peters, top stuff. Thank you for that report. Yeah, it's, that is the theme, isn't it, with the Tory leadership race. We had our special GB News leadership event last week. Robert Jenrick saying all the right things for a lot of our viewers and Tory members. However, the problem is we've heard it all before. Can the Tories, can the new Conservative leader regain the trust of the party? People such as Nigel Farage and Reform would argue not. But Robert Jenrick insists, trust me, I'm the man. Lots more to come between now and 4 o'clock, including King Charles. He's been accused of genocide by a furious Aussie senator who chanted, "You are not our king and this is not your land." That's after addressing the Australian Parliament. We'll have all the latest reaction to that. But first, your news headlines with Katie Bowen.
Ben, thank you. Your top stories at 3:30. The Prime Minister has asked the British public to share their experiences and ideas to help fix the NHS, adding there's a need for the health service to move towards more digital systems. Meanwhile, Health Secretary Wes Streeting said the NHS is going through what is objectively the worst crisis in its history, with some patients receiving what he described as a death sentence because of the service's failings. Sir Keir Starmer and Mr Streeting were giving a speech in East London this morning as they launched the party's health service consultation about the institution's next decade. The Prime Minister said NHS workers deserve a lot better than what has happened over the last 14 years. A senator has confronted the King in Australia's Parliament, shouting, "This is not your land, you are not my king." The incident happened after His Majesty finished an address at Australia's Parliament House on the second official day of his engagements in the country. Lydia Thorpe interrupted the ceremony in the capital city of Canberra by shouting for about a minute before she was escorted away by security.
You are a genocide! This is not your land! This is not your land! You are not my king! You are not our king!
The ceremony was then concluded without any reference to the incident, and the royal couple proceeded to meet the public who'd waited outside the building to greet them. Their Majesties are on a 6-day tour of the country. They've also visited the Australian National Botanic Gardens this afternoon. It's the King's first visit to the country since becoming monarch. A 25-year-old woman has pleaded guilty to assault after throwing a milkshake at Reform UK leader Nigel Farage during the general election campaign. Victoria Thomas Bowen appeared in court this morning, charged with assault by beating and criminal damage. Mr Farage, now Clacton MP, was doused as he left the Moon and Starfish Wetherspoon pub in the Essex seaside town on June the 4th. He'd earlier addressed supporters at a rally during the election campaign. More than 100 flood warnings remain in place across the UK today following Storm Ashley. The storm has battered parts of the country with hurricane-force winds and torrential rain as more flights and trains are cancelled. The New Road cricket ground in Worcester was completely submerged in water. Rail and flight delays continue due to 80-mile-per-hour winds as the UK is put on high alert for flooding. Those are your latest GB News headlines for now. Now it's time for your finance report.
For the very latest GB News direct to your smartphone, sign up to news alerts by scanning the QR code or go to gbnews.com/alerts.
Cheers Britannia Wine Club proudly sponsors the GB News Financial Report.
Here's a quick snapshot of today's markets. The pound will buy you $1.3016 and €1.2001. The price of gold is £2,102.80 per ounce, and the FTSE 100 is at 8,349 points.
Cheers Britannia Wine Club proudly sponsors the GB News Financial Report.
Thanks, Casey. Now, listen, if you want to get in contact with me today over the next 2.5 hours, I'd love you to. I need your company. Simply go to gbnews.com/your say. I'll endeavour to read out the best of your messages as we make our way through the show. I'm Ben Leo on GB News, Britain's news channel. Back in 2 minutes.
Afternoon, welcome to your latest update from the Met Office here on GB News. Overnight, many of us will have some decent clear spells, but a bit of fog is likely across the southeast, and there will be some outbreaks of rain trickling south. We've had a damp day across the far southeast. That rain is scooting away, but showery rain pushing in across Scotland and Northern Ireland this evening, so some wet weather for a time, and that'll scoot south into parts of northern England and Wales by morning. Ahead of that, though, some clear skies, apart from that mist and fog across the southeast. Turning quite chilly, actually. Temperatures well down into single figures in rural spots. This zone of cloudier weather will help to keep the temperatures up. Will make for a fairly grey start in the morning over northwest England and West Wales, and we'll see some showery rain getting into the southeast too. And that mist and fog could still be around across the southeast. Bear that in mind first thing tomorrow morning. Further north, we'll see some brighter skies and some good spells of sunshine, but showers will again be moving in on a brisk breeze across the northwest of Scotland. They'll by and large keep going on and off throughout the day, and this zone of cloudier weather will push southwards. So after some early sunshine, I suspect it will turn quite grey across East Anglia and the southeast. The rain there will fizzle out, so you might just catch a light shower, but many places will be dry. Brightening up across Wales and northern England. Come the afternoon, some good spells of sunshine here and for the southwest of England. Temperatures again getting into the teens, so feeling quite pleasant in the sunny spells. Most areas having quite light winds, although still quite breezy in northern Scotland. And it will be again here on Wednesday with a little bit of light rain and drizzle in the northwest. The odd light shower across the south. Again, fog could be a bit of a problem for Wednesday morning, but once that's cleared, many places looking dry and bright again. The winds will be increasing, particularly across the north and the west, but so will the temperatures, ticking up to 16 or 17 degrees for most of us.
The latest GB News travel.
The M25 clockwise in Kent still struggling due to an earlier lorry fire and ongoing repairs. That's between junction 5 at Sevenoaks to junction 6 at Godstone. Heading to London, one lane is closed due to a broken down vehicle on the M25 anti-clockwise. That's from junction 28 at Brentwood on towards junction 27 at the Thaden interchange. For Oxfordshire, the M40 southbound, there's a lane closure on the exit slip road. That's been causing heavy traffic due to a broken down vehicle at junction 9 Bicester. For Cheshire, the M6 northbound, there's a lane closure on the exit slip road due to an earlier overturned vehicle at junction 19 Knutsford. Traffic does seem to be coping relatively well. There'll be further updates for you throughout the afternoon, so do tune in. That's the latest update.
You can stay up to date throughout the day by visiting our website gbnews.com.
Hello, welcome back. Ben Leo in for Martin Daubney this afternoon, only on GB News. Now, did you see this? An Indigenous politician has caused quite the stir overnight after heckling King Charles following a speech at Parliament House in the Australian capital, Canberra. Independent Senator Lydia Thorpe accused the royal family of committing genocide, saying the monarch should answer for the thousands of massacre sites, quote unquote, throughout the country. Let's take a look.
Give us our land back! Give us our land back! Give us what you
royal biographer Angela Levin is here to give her thoughts on that. Angela, good afternoon. What do you think the King would have made of that reception? Do you think it would have rocked him a little bit?
No, I think it had two levels of thinking of what it was. One is that he knows that there are people who actually want to grab a lot of attention, who are a little bit off the rocket, as you could call it, and he would just carry on. I mean, Camilla next to him was smiling in a way to say, oh, gosh, here we go, you know, something like that. He's very strong. He's used to things like this. I don't think he will be taken by it either, because he's had such a wonderful welcome, and the thousands of people outside the church yesterday, and people delighted to have seen him. So here, this is one person who is quite honestly ridiculous, but to show how much it was really to make a big sort of showdown of herself is that she tried to do this yesterday at the Australian War Museum Memorial, and police were trying to stop her, and she was fighting with them and screaming at the same time. So she pulled off her jumper, which is what he was hanging on to, and ran away. Obviously thought, well, I'll try again tomorrow. So I think we mustn't take too much notice of extremely rude, unpleasant people. But I should say that nowadays the senators are voted in by popular votes. They're not just chosen, and so I hope that the public there will think that she's not the right person to choose ever again.
Right, got it. They had a referendum, didn't they, Angela, the Aussies? Was it in '99 they held a vote on the future of the Constitution, and everybody, well, not everybody, the majority said, yeah, let's stay with the royal family.
Yes, they wanted to stay with the royal family. They make a lot of noise again about they want to change it, but the King doesn't mind that. He's very happy for countries to be private on their own and have nothing to do with him, but he does want them to come to the meetings once a year and discuss things with other Commonwealth countries and be friends in that sort of way. The late Queen Elizabeth was the same. She wasn't trying to get people to stay with her as Queen and to do absolutely what they're told. The King doesn't try to interfere with what's going on there, but he loves it because he was there when he was 17 to have lessons, and he enjoyed that hugely, and he's loved it. This is his 16th visit to Australia, and you can tell he really wants to come because he's not well, and he's still having his cancer treatment, which he stopped, especially so that he won't get too tired and he can manage all that's going on. But he's not somebody who's got to tell everybody what to do. I mean, he just lets people in Australia do what they like, and he likes to go along and share it. I mean, they are going through 30,000 miles, actually, in these next 10 days, and they're trying to get through 10 things a day, splitting off so that Camilla will go one place, he will go the other. So he wants to sort of eat up as much of Australia as he possibly can.
Yeah, Angela, having travelled for the first time to Australia last year, I know going there, the journey is no thankless task. And when you're recovering or at least suffering from cancer like the King is, you've got to say, whether you're fans of the monarchy or the King or not, props to the King for A, going to Australia in the first place, and B, as you said, embarking on all these different engagements and visits and meetings with people, even people such as Republic, the protest group, who have travelled to Australia. I think they've been hosting protests in Canberra and Sydney. Surely, even if you don't agree with the idea of the monarchy, you have to give credit to the man and the Queen, Camilla, for the effort they're putting in. Some people like to call them sponges. I thoroughly disagree with that, but you can't deny they're hard-working.
They're extremely hardworking, and actually, there's a thing that if they want to take a voting on whether they should get rid of him, it will cost them £500 million, right? And it's 150 million, sorry, £150 million. And this, it's not worth it. They don't want to. Another senator said that it will come up on the 99th thing that we're interested in out of 100. No, we're going to leave it. So it's just really down to rudeness and lack of politeness and being very unpleasant to a man who actually does his best. But I think that nowadays he understands that he needs to keep calm and he doesn't make himself upset or ill. And this is one person who is obviously screaming and shouting and being extremely rude and doesn't have to have much take in anybody's life.
A vocal minority, we would call them, Angela. Thank you for your time. See you soon. Great to be with you.
Bye.
OK, coming up, £650,000 worth in taxpayers' money went on Pride-related events in the past year. Can you guess what? Well, I'll tell you. Rainbow crossings, rainbow-coloured fudge, pronoun badges and drag bingo. That sounds interesting. We'll be looking into this shocking use of taxpayer money shortly with the person behind the research. I'm Ben Leo on GB News, Britain's news channel. Stay with me.
Britain's newsroom. Weekday mornings from 9:30.
So I'm one of the lucky ones. I'm going to see your show, Behind the Shoulder Pads, one night only at the Adelphi Theatre, October the 22nd. You're talking about your extraordinary life. Stage, screen, published author, 19 books, TV, most important.
Yeah.
Is there anyone who's managed to straddle, 7, 8 decades in showbiz and still be at the top?
Yes. I was thinking about that the other day because somebody said, you know, the last of good. There is a Shirley MacLaine.
Sure.
She started the same time as me.
Right.
Sophia Loren.
Yeah.
She started around the same time.
She's not working much, though.
It's true, she's not, but she's still out there being, you know, a major icon. And of course, people like Dick Van Dyke, who's just almost 100.
Yeah, he's incredible,
you know,
isn't he?
I'm a mere babe next to him.
You are. But and I was thinking about, you've written some extraordinary, wicked, waspish diaries, which of course you can because you've worked with so many people. Look at the names: Frank Sinatra, Lana Turner, Elizabeth Taylor, Dean Martin, Gregory Peck,
Richard Burton,
Paul Newman. The list goes on.
Gene Kelly,
and
my
Gene
favourite.
Kelly. Was he your favourite?
Yes.
Why?
Because I saw him in a movie when I was a little girl called For Me and My Gal with Judy Garland, and I just fell in love with him. It's such a cute movie. Well, they don't make movies like that anymore. And then I was lucky enough when I first went to Hollywood at age 20 to meet him and literally hang out with him and his friends. And then I put him in a movie with me that I produced. He played my husband in a movie called Sins. And he was wonderful. He was really wonderful.
The People's Channel.
Why go out on a Friday night when Friday night comes straight to your home?
Talking about?
Join me and my A-team of top pundits. Chemistry tonight is electric. As we tackle the big stories of the day with wit, insight and fearless energy.
Man of the people.
It's all vibe.
Just a filing cabinet on wheels with a tie on.
So, order in Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan, every Friday at 8, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
It's Patrick Christie's Tonight, and here we do things differently.
It's explaining the absolute madness of this, doesn't it?
It's explosive.
I mean, this is very good.
It's lively.
850. Your government sat there, Sean, and it did nothing.
It's controversial.
And the Middle East has been in turmoil since before I was born.
It's everything you need to kickstart your evening.
Everyone's had their Weetabix tonight. I love to see it.
That's Patrick Christie's Tonight, weeknights from 9 p.m. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello, welcome back. Now, why don't we turn our attention to a heartbreak, to be frank, for a young Liverpool fan who missed out on his opportunity to score a penalty kick at Anfield yesterday. Take a look at this. what we just showed you was ex-Liverpool and England goalkeeper David James denying a young Liverpool fan twice from the penalty spot from scoring at the Kop end of Anfield during half-time events in their victory at home to Chelsea yesterday. So the young lad, the 11-year-old, steps up. Typically, the goalkeeper, whoever it is, would just let the ball go in so the crowd can cheer and the young boy has a good day and a lifelong memory. But no, not according to David James. He decides to save the first kick and then indeed the second kick when they told the young boy to take it again. David James, now a long time retired, of course, he was booed furiously by Liverpool fans behind the goal who were angry that he denied the kid a chance to score. What do you think? Should he have let him score, or should he have said, yeah, you're not scoring against me, this is life, this is real life? And let us know, gbnews.com/your say. Now, elsewhere, how do you feel about valuable taxpayers' money being spent on Pride events? Well, taxpayers forked out £650,000 in funding for LGBT-themed events over the past year, rocketing by £100,000 compared to the previous year. That's according to research from the Taxpayers Alliance. Among the expenses are painted pedestrian crossings, pronoun badges and drag bingo events and rainbow-coloured fudge. Well, we can speak now with the person behind the research, and that's the investigations campaign manager at the Taxpayers Alliance, Joanna Marchong. Joanna, thank you for joining me. Some would argue that we need these LGBT-themed projects. We need to promote diversity and equality because these are marginalised people. It is a good use of taxpayer money, is it not?
Start by saying hi, Ben. Thanks for having me on. And you do make a good point. We, of course, need these initiatives, but how productive are running these events or spending all this money on frivolous kind of merchandise and over-the-top gimmicks for people to feel included? I mean, the NHS uses the excuse that, oh, well, we want people to feel inclusive, we want people who are homosexual to be able to come and feel safe and get things checked out. But if they're looking down and seeing their nurse with rainbow-coloured laces, will that really make them feel more comfortable? I really don't think so.
Yeah, we've got this rainbow-coloured fudge on screen, if you can see it now. I think that alone cost one council £25,000. Joanna, what is drag bingo? Have you got any idea what that entails?
Gosh, I don't know the ins and outs of that, quite frankly, but I do know that it's not the only kind of drag-related event. I mean, Hartlepool Council decided to have a drag storytelling event, which, I mean, sounds along the same lines, just absurd and very silly. These kind of events that you put on, you want to think, how many people are showing up? How much did it cost to even put it on in the first place? Get all the advertising, all the marketing costs, because those are also things that we don't think about now, but they do cost councils and organisations so much money.
We've got 30 seconds left, unfortunately, but do you expect this bill to rocket in the next year? Because it's been a £100,000 increase over the past 12 months. Are we expecting it to go up even more over the next 12 months?
I think you're completely right about that. I mean, it's gone up in a year £100,000. We're seeing more ridiculous uses of this money. We've come after NHS Trust for rainbow crossings before. We see NHS Trust this year spending about £1,000 doing it again. So when is enough enough? We need big voices in order to stop this silly spending.
OK, great research. Joanna Marchong from the Taxpayers Alliance, thank you very much for being with me. Lots more to come in the next 2 hours, including all your suggestions for reforming the NHS, including NHS-branded plasters and first aid kits to raise a bit of wonga for the coffers. Good idea. I'm Ben Leo on GB News, Britain's news channel. Now time for your weather with Alex Deakin.
Expect a warm front, moving from the kitchen right through to the rest of the house. Boxed Boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Afternoon, welcome to your latest update from the Met Office here on GB News. Overnight, many of us will have some decent clear spells, but a bit of fog is likely across the southeast, and there will be some outbreaks of rain trickling south. We've had a damp day across the far southeast. That rain is scooting away, but showery rain pushing in across Scotland and Northern Ireland this evening, so some wet weather for a time, and that'll scoot south into parts of northern England and Wales by morning. Ahead of that, though, some clear skies, apart from that mist and fog across the southeast. Turning quite chilly, actually. Temperatures well down into single figures in rural spots. This zone of cloudier weather will help to keep the temperatures up. Will make for a fairly grey start in the morning over northwest England and West Wales, and we'll see some showery rain getting into the southeast too. And that mist and fog could still be around across the southeast. Bear that in mind first thing tomorrow morning. Further north, we'll see some brighter skies and some good spells of sunshine, but showers will again be moving in on a brisk breeze across the northwest of Scotland. They'll by and large keep going on and off throughout the day, and this zone of cloudier weather will push southwards. So after some early sunshine, I suspect it will turn quite grey across East Anglia and the southeast. The rain there will fizzle out, so you might just catch a light shower, but many places will be dry. Brightening up across Wales and northern England. Come the afternoon, some good spells of sunshine here and for the southwest of England. Temperatures again getting into the teens, so feeling quite pleasant in the sunny spells. Most areas having quite light winds, although still quite breezy in northern Scotland. And it will be again here on Wednesday with a little bit of light rain and drizzle in the northwest. The odd light shower across the south. Again, fog could be a bit of a problem for Wednesday morning, but once that's cleared, many places looking dry and bright again. The winds will be increasing, particularly across the north and the west, but so will the temperatures, ticking up to 16 or 17 degrees for most of us.
A nice bright morning will generate a lovely warm day, right through to the evening. Boxed Solar, sponsors of weather on GB News.
The latest GB News travel.
The M26 westbound in Kent is still out of action following earlier problems on the M25 from junction 2A at Rootham on towards junction 1 at the M25. For Merseyside, the M53 northbound, that's currently blocked. That's been causing queuing traffic following a broken down vehicle from junction 1 on towards the A59. Congestion back towards Morton Spur. In South Yorkshire, one lane is currently closed for the M1 southbound. That's been causing heavy traffic due to an accident from junction 33 at Catcliffe on towards junction 32 at the M18 interchange. In Essex, severe delays at the M25 Dartford Tunnel. Two lanes are out of action due to emergency repairs as you approach junction 31 at Lakeside. Congestion back towards the Swanley interchange.
You can stay up to date throughout the day by visiting our website gbnews.com.
This is the final week to grab your chance to win £36,000 cash in the Great British Giveaway, and you really could be next.
Hi, I'm Angela from Wigan and I won £30,000. Winning the money enabled me to treat my children, which I've not been able to do for a while. And if I can win, anyone can win.
For another chance to win £36,000 in tax-free cash, text cash to 63232. One entry costs £2 plus one standard network rate message, or text bonus to 63232. 5 entries cost £5 plus one standard network rate message. You can enter online at gbnews.com/win. Entries start from just £2, or post your name and number to GB08 PO Box 8690 Derby DE1 9TT. UK only. Entrance must be 18 or over. Lines close 5 p.m. this Friday. Please check the closing time if listening or watching on demand. Good luck.
Mark Dolan tonight is your weekend dose of news, debate and entertainment. This sounds like a wild conspiracy theory. Don't miss my big opinion. Mark meets and my take at 10. Democracy is a funny old thing. And we don't do boring, not on my watch. I just won't have it. Let's go and get another glass of that bubbly. You've earned it. That's Mark Dolan tonight, Saturday and Sunday, 9 to 11, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome to State of the Nation, daily plunge into the stories shaping our country. I'm Jacob Rees-Mogg, and Monday to Thursday we bring you the insights, the facts, the truth about how our country is being governed. Because what happens in Downing Street matters down your street. Tune in to State of the Nation every Monday to Thursday, 8 to 9 o'clock. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, hope you're well. It's 4 p.m. Welcome to the Martin Daubney Show on GB News with me, Ben Leo, broadcasting live from the heart of Westminster and indeed all across the UK. The government has launched a major consultation on the future of the NHS, billing it the biggest national conversation about its future since its birth. But what will the public call for? Reform, or should we just privatise the whole thing? And down under, King Charles has been accused of genocide during a visit to Australia by a furious senator who chanted, "You are not our king and this is not your land." That's after addressing the Australian Parliament. We'll have all the latest. And gender fluid, cisgender and gender neutral are just 3 of the 24 genders the SNP claim are real, as the Scottish Government is being accused of being, well, disconnected, quite frankly, from the real world. That's all coming in your next hour. And I want to hear from you. gbnews.com/your say. What are you up to today? Any plans tonight? Any plans for the week ahead? Some emails flying in already. Noel, you said, Ben, that Aussie senator is just the Australian equivalent of Steve Bray. Steve Bray, of course, the pro-Remain protester who's been frequenting Westminster for many, many years now. Grumpy Grandad on the NHS and Wes Streeting calling for public comments on its reform. You've said the NHS has saved my life a number of times throughout my life. The staff are brilliant, but the organisation itself can't handle the sheer numbers of people trying to use it. Thank you for those comments. Keep them coming in. We're going to have a jam-packed 2 hours ahead. But first, here's your news headlines with Katie Bowen.
Ben, thank you. It's just gone 4 o'clock. These are your latest headlines from the GB newsroom. Speaking in Parliament a short time ago, the Home Secretary has vowed to end hotel use by clearing the backlog of Home Office decisions on asylum claims. Yvette Cooper said that the government had inherited an asylum backlog that was increasing. She vowed to fix asylum decision-making processes in order to clear the backlog and end hotel use. The Home Secretary also said that agreements to stop small boats reaching the English Channel before migrants board would not be possible without international law.
Know that sadly that will take time as a result of what we have inherited with the soaring backlog as a result of the collapse in decision making, but we are determined to make sure that we can clear the backlog and save the taxpayer hundreds of millions, if not billions of pounds.
Elsewhere, the Prime Minister has asked the British public to share their experiences and ideas to help fix the NHS, adding there's a need for the health service to move towards more digital systems. Meanwhile, Health Secretary Wes Streeting said the NHS is going through what is objectively the worst crisis in its history, with some patients receiving what he described as a death sentence because of the service's failings. Sir Keir Starmer and Mr Streeting were giving a speech in East London this morning as they launched the party's health service consultation about the institution's next decade. The Prime Minister said NHS workers deserve a lot better than what has happened over the last 14 years.
What we want to achieve is a situation where we
A senator has confronted the King in Australia's Parliament, shouting, "This is not your land, you are not my King." The incident happened after His Majesty finished an address at Australia's Parliament House on the second official day of his engagements in the country. Lydia Thorpe interrupted the ceremony in the capital city of Canberra by shouting for about a minute before she was escorted away by security.
You are a genocide! This is not your land! This is not your land! You are not my king! You are not our king!
The ceremony was then concluded without any reference to the incident, and the royal couple proceeded to meet the public who'd waited outside the building to greet them. Their Majesties are on a 6-day tour of the country. They've also visited the Australian National Botanic Gardens this afternoon. It's the King's first visit to Australia since becoming monarch. A 25-year-old woman has pleaded guilty to assault after throwing a milkshake at Reform UK leader Nigel Farage during the general election campaign. Victoria Thomas Bowen appeared in court this morning charged with assault by beating and criminal damage. Mr Farage, now Clacton MP, was doused as he left the Moon and Starfish Wetherspoon pub in the Essex seaside town on June the 4th. He'd earlier addressed supporters at a rally during the election campaign. Robert Jenrick has vowed to crack down on grooming gangs, saying gang members should face whole life prison sentences. The Tory leadership candidate says there needs to be changes to the sentencing guidelines and impose whole life sentences on members of grooming gangs, which would mean convicted offenders would never be released from jail. Currently, the maximum sentence for grooming under the 2003 Sexual Offences Act carries a minimum of 14 years.
What I want to see are mandatory life sentences for these despicable predators, so that you're not out in 14 years, as the current law suggests, or less, but actually you're never out of prison again. I want those of these predators who are not British citizens to be removed from our country with compulsory deportations. And the public officials who turn a blind eye for fear of racism or community relations, I want them to be prosecuted and barred from working in the public sector ever again.
More than 1,000 extra prisoners are set to be freed early this week as the government puts the latest stage of its plan to ease jail overcrowding into action. Tomorrow, around 1,100 inmates will be released as the policy is expanded to those serving sentences of 5 years or more. It follows the first release of around 1,700 prisoners from jails across England and Wales last month. This came after Justice Secretary Shabana Mahmood announced plans in July to temporarily cut the proportion of sentences inmates must serve behind bars from 50% to 40%, as the Ministry of Justice said overcrowding had pushed jails to the point of collapse. Those are your latest GB News headlines for now. I'm Katie Bowen. Now it's back to Ben.
Thanks, Katie. Now, the government has launched a public consultation on the future of the health service in England, which is being labelled the biggest national conversation about the NHS's future since its birth. Members of the public will be able to share their views online until the start of next year. And amongst the government's plans include transforming the NHS into a, quote, neighbourhood health service and fining patients for missed appointments. Health Secretary Wes Streeting could also introduce plans to store your private health records in a central NHS database. Well, let's get more on this now with GB News political correspondent Catherine Forster, who joins me live in the studio. Afternoon, Catherine. Thank you for keeping me company in this very lonely studio. This is an NHS revolution, a war cry, according to Wes Streeting, a 10-year plan which will start from when?
Well, they are consulting now. They're saying that they want the public to get in touch, that they think that we'll all have had good experiences in the NHS, but also bad experiences where we can see examples of waste and whatever. They want to hear about that. So they're consulting now. They say they're going to put the plan forward beginning of next year. They've got lots of ideas already for all those people saying, well, you've had 14 years in opposition to think about this. Why are you only asking people now? I think they've got a lot of it together in terms of they want to go from sort of analogue to digital. They want less reliance on hospitals, more, help for people in the community, prevention rather than cure. But they do want to hear from people too. But of course, people want to know when things are going to change, and they want to see change now, don't they? Because Labour touted themselves as change. And of course, all of this stuff is tricky and it takes time. But what we do know is there's this budget looming next week that's going to be full of probably a lot of bad news for lots of people and lots of departments. But it does sound like the NHS is going to be probably the big winner. But they want to be clear that the extra money that they're going to get is going to have to be tied to reform, because we're spending more than ever on the NHS. It's like this bottomless pit taking up more and more and more money, and yet the outcomes, particularly since the pandemic, are worse and worse. So there's a lot of reform needed, certainly.
Well, yes, you just answered my next question, which was the NHS is, as far as I'm aware, getting more money than ever before. What is the point of just throwing good money after bad? And also, do you think Wes Streeting and the Labour government are going to address what some would argue is one of the key issues behind the health service, which is exploding population?
On that, no, I don't think so. But of course, the population of Britain is getting bigger. We're living longer. We're getting fatter, frankly, aren't we? We're an ageing population, so we are becoming more and more expensive to deal with. But they are clear that they are going to expect changes from the NHS, because Amanda Pritchard, the chair of NHS England, she's only very recently admitted that their productivity has fallen since the pandemic. They've got more money and yet they're carrying out fewer procedures. So Wes Streeting is very, very clear that it's not going to be enough to carry on as before, that very radical reforms are going to be needed, including things like lots more doctors working at weekends, working at evenings, something that they've previously been very, very resistant to, things like that, and also the use of technology, because we know that they still use fax machines, which is just seems crazy in this day and age. Talking about having all of your information in one place on the app, so you don't go to the GP who takes a load of notes and then go to the hospital, give them the same information over and over and over again. I think there'll be worries about security around that, but if they can do that in a way that keeps people's information safe, I think that is one way that they can streamline things.
And there's some other good ideas which I don't think personally sound too far-fetched, including fining people for missing GP appointments. I spoke to Kevin Schofield earlier. He said it would just be too much bureaucracy to set up. But I saw some information a couple of months back where they suggested linking fines, recuperating fines to benefit payments and that kind of thing. And I think they do it in France, if I'm not mistaken.
It's something which is suggested every so often as a good way to try to recoup some money, and they do lose huge amounts of money in missed appointments. And of course, at the moment, if you miss an appointment, there's no cost to you, is there? Just to the NHS. But every time it's suggested, the conclusion seems to be that the administrative costs of trying to enforce that are simply not worth it. So I think at the moment Wes Streeting hasn't ruled it out, but I wouldn't hold your breath on that happening anytime soon. But it does seem like they're looking at tech. We heard about the weight loss jabs last week, didn't they, for the benefits bill? But things like smartwatches, giving smartwatches to people with high blood pressure or diabetes to help them sort of monitor things like that. So a lot more tech coming our way.
Not sure I like the sound of the NHS, you know, knowing my every step and heartbeat. So some interesting comments, though, on the public consultation. I'm not sure whether the comments were meant to be public for the world to see, but they include... So these are ideas from members of the great British public on how to reform the NHS, going straight to Wes Streeting's desk. Somebody said mandatory euthanasia to free up hospital beds. I mean, that sounds quite chilling. So Tony Blair, as head of NHS England, they said we must urgently appoint Sir Tony Blair as the head of NHS England, with Mr Milburn as his reforms are. Sizable salaries must follow. The pairing, after all, produced the highest NHS approval ratings in post-war history, a too often forgotten fact amidst a wave of lazy Iraq finger-washing. Someone else suggested an NHS TV channel. Others have suggested branded NHS plasters and first aid kits that they can flog on a website to raise money. And also, Catherine, maximum BMI for nurses. They should be leading by example, somebody said.
Indeed, indeed. I'll be very surprised if these responses continue to be public for very much longer. Some of them more serious than others. But, of course, there were big changes, weren't there, under New Labour, but then there was more money sloshing around, and I think it was interesting. They did involve the private sector quite a lot, didn't they? And I think that is something that Wes Streeting is open to this time, to try to get waiting lists down. Just worth saying, I did have a sit-down interview with the Health Secretary, which will be showing, I think, just after 5 o'clock, so worth staying tuned for.
Yes, cracking. You sat down with him today?
Yes, this morning at the... over in East London at this ambulance centre where he and the Prime Minister were speaking.
And we'll be seeing that for the first time on this show in, 45 minutes? So stay tuned for that, 5 o'clock. Catherine, thank you very much indeed. Other ideas include legalising cannabis, I guess, for medicinal purposes. Increased use of NHS motorbikes. Very good idea, actually. I was watching Andrew Pearce on another TV channel in the morning the other day, and he was due on Britain's Newsroom on this channel some 20 minutes later, and I said to somebody, how's he going to get from there to our studio in Paddington? And they said he goes on a motorbike. So, of course, a very good idea if you're strapped for time. Somebody else said replacing ambulance sirens with healthy eating advice. I'm not sure what that means. What, if an ambulance is on an emergency, instead of blaring blues and twos, it dishes out healthy eating advice? Not sure that would work. Free water bottle refills, and Adrian Chiles for Health Secretary. So that's the former Match of the Day. I think it was Match of the Day, or ITV at least. Adrian Charles for Health Tech. Interesting. Let's get more reaction now from Labour spokesman James Mathewson. Good afternoon, James. Labour a bit ambitious with this by suggesting that it's a 10-year plan. They, of course, need to win the next election first, and if the first 100 odd days are anything to go by, they've lost a lot of goodwill, so slightly optimistic.
It is. I think every government has to try and be optimistic, though, don't they, Ben? They've got to try and do this idea of looking ahead, and it's not really in their own benefits often to do so because, you know, plans are kind of difficult to implement if they're not 10-year in kind of these large-scale organisations like the NHS, because you have to look ahead at the changes that are coming with the changes, the development of technology, if we want to be ahead of the curve. But like you say, you know, elections and our election cycle, our entire electoral system doesn't really suit that, to be honest. It works in our five-year increments. So obviously it's very difficult for them to think what's going to come after that. But I think if they focus on the right thing and doing the right thing, hopefully electorally the British public see that and it gives them a chance to be able to say, here's what we're doing and here's what we want to get done at the next election.
Doesn't it feel, though, James, some would argue that they're just kicking the can down the road? I mean, we're talking about a 10-year plan that maybe won't be looked at until spring next year. Labour were full of promises during the election, but it seems like we're having to wait for a lot of them.
I think you have to wait for a lot of them. You do. I mean, that was never kind of... I mean, there was always the 100-day plan. I mean, the 100 days have been spent chaotically, you know, with a lot of PR disasters and communications disasters. But it seems the departments individually are doing all the things they wanted to do within that 100 days. The NHS plan was never one of those things. These things are huge. They are colossal. Rather than just doing some little changes here and there needs to be full-scale root and branch reform. And if that's going to be the case, then they need to take it seriously and need to implement big, long-scale plans, and that takes time.
What about immigration, James? It seems to be the elephant in the room when it comes to Labour. We're talking about reforming the NHS, you know, trying to save lots of money, but nobody's talking about the fact that we've had a population explosion over recent decades in the tens of millions.
That's because there's a difference in opinion, Ben, between the people who talk about immigration as their kind of main focus and the rest of us in the country who believe in restoring the public services anyway and not blaming it on immigration entirely, because, of course, immigration is a factor and it's something that gets looked at, something the Home Secretary is looking at. But, of course, these public services have been defunded for 14 years. They're in no state to accommodate...
But James, the NHS has more money than ever before, so that's not true.
Yeah, but that's because the nature of healthcare is there are always gaps to plug. That's why looking at how to spend that money best and the new technologies, all of the new developments...
So it's not right to say that it's been neglected because it's got more money than ever before. That doesn't fit.
No, under the Tories, it wasn't matched per the spending requirements. Healthcare, unfortunately, it's never going to be efficient in its entirety. You're treating the health universally of an entire population of a country. Health changes. We had a global pandemic. We've had all sorts of challenges that people wouldn't predict. And they require investment and they require lots of money to be spent. It's never going to be cheap. And if we want it to be cheap, then unfortunately we're looking in the wrong place.
What do you make of these ideas about NHS-branded plasters and first aid kits to raise a couple of quid?
Like, it's great to see people getting involved. And I think it's great to see people have ideas and, you know, up and down the country, people have ideas and they want to contribute to the discussion. So it's great that there is that chance for them to do so. I do think it shows that a lot of people, frankly, don't understand the scale of the challenge here. There is so much reform required in how we do things generally. We're spending money as a country in things in places that are just not needed. And unfortunately, those who are more conservative in their leaning aren't going to like the way the Labour Party tackles a lot of this stuff, because it's designed to talk about things from a social perspective. That's what the Labour Party does, and a lot of the challenges, a lot of the answers to those challenges that have been suggested seem to be a lot more right of centre than the Labour Party even under Wes Streeton would consider, I think.
OK, all right, James Mathewson, thank you for joining me this afternoon. Appreciate your time.
Thanks.
Just some breaking news in the last minute or so. Metropolitan Police marksman Martin Blake, who is 40, has been cleared at the Old Bailey of the murder of Chris Caba, who was 24, when he was fatally shot in Streatham, South East London, on September the 5th, 2022. So just to reiterate that, Met Police marksman Martin Blake the 40-year-old who was on trial at the Old Bailey, he's been cleared of the murder of Chris Caba, the 24-year-old who was fatally shot in Streatham, South East London, on September the 5th, 2022. More on that as we have it. All right, coming up, we'll be discussing Tory leadership candidate Robert Jenrick's plans to crack down on grooming gangs as he calls for whole-life sentences for those who commit the offences. I'm Ben Leo on GB News, Britain's news channel.
I'm Christopher Hope. From pop stars to politicians, I'll interview anybody in a pub who's got a political opinion. Join me every Friday on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube or gbnews.com, or wherever you get your podcasts. This is GB News, the People's Channel.
Sunday with Michael Portillo from 11, only on GB News.
Welcome back to Sunday with Michael Portillo. Well, drinkers have been warned about a drop in the quality of French wines after poor weather conditions hit this year's grape harvest. Winemakers across France will make 240 million fewer bottles of wine this year, the country's farming ministry said on Tuesday. So should we think of switching from French to English? I'm joined now by sommelier and founder of Inflorescence Wines, Jacinta Madison Williams. Hello, Jacinta.
Good morning.
Nice to see you. First of all, let's just think about the poor French.
We should.
Has this been a fairly universal weather catastrophe for France?
It has. A kind of across the board, we're about 22% down on last year's crops, which is quite significant. I think it's like one of the 4 years over the last century that have been this low. So,
and it's affected both quality and quantity?
I would say more so quantity. There's always ways of counteracting quality. It depends if people are desperate to make wine. They can obviously push out more watered down grapes. There's been a lot of rain, if you hadn't noticed. Not only in France, we felt it here too. But lots of frost, supercell hailstorms have completely wiped out some crops. So in some cases, there's nothing to make. In other cases, it's just really watered down grapes and you want to pick earlier to make sure you're avoiding all those rains. But I would say more so it's quantity. But saying that, France is still the biggest producer of wine in the world. It might be taken over by Spain this year, but as a consumer, don't panic. We're not going to run out of wine. And we obviously have lots of lovely wine growing here now in England. So whether we do make a little jump for a bit to English wine, but there's definitely still lots out there.
GB News, the People's Channel.
In the GB Newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens.
With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK,
we're ready to keep you up to date with what's happening every half an hour, every single day. Bulletins here on GB News,
the People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
Join me, Nana Akwe, for an informative, interactive news programme with a difference. It's fun.
No, he didn't say that, though.
I'm so surprised.
I think there's an element of truth to that.
Join me from 3 p.m. every weekend, only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Hello, welcome back. Ben Leo in for Martin Daubney, only on GB News. And some breaking news in the last few moments. Met Police marksman Martin Blake, the 40-year-old who was on trial for the murder of 24-year-old Chris Caba, who was fatally shot in Streatham, South East London in September 22, has been cleared. The murder charge brought against Martin Blake had sparked fury among firearms officers, with dozens downing tools in apparent protest, and the army even being put on standby to plug the gap. Well, let's get the latest now with GB News national reporter Charlie Peters. Charlie, a sensational verdict, I guess, from the Old Bailey this afternoon.
Ben, the jury taking just a few hours to come to this decision. And they were shown a lot of footage during this trial. Footage of all the body-worn cameras on all of the officers involved in that enforced stop in Streatham 2 Septembers ago when Chris Caba was driving an Audi away from Camberwell and he knew he was being followed by the police. We heard during the trial that his car had been linked with a firearms incident in Brixton the night before, and the number plate was picked up on the ANPR recognition system, but they did not know who was behind the vehicle. In footage shown to jurors, they saw the approach of those unmarked and marked vehicles as they tailed Chris Caba through South East London. He stopped at an address in Streatham when a marked police vehicle stopped before him. And what followed? The 17 seconds of chaos, of dramatic, chaotic situations, was the centre of this trial. An enforced stop is meant to be a fully controlled procedure, but the officers giving evidence at this trial said that that was not what followed. They also said that in these scenarios, they don't even practice or train on car shunting situations because they are considered so dangerous. But that's precisely what happened when Chris Caba was told to stop by those armed officers. He first drove forward, hitting the car in front, a marked police vehicle which had Martin Blake, the sergeant, the authorised firearms officer, inside it. He then reversed again, hitting a car behind, the unmarked vehicle that was tailing him. Going forward again, not able to squeeze through that gap, it was when he reversed that Martin Blake fired that fatal shot that hit Chris Caba in the head. He claimed in the trial that he did not mean to kill Chris Caba. It was not meant to be a fatal shot. He merely wished to incapacitate him. Well, during the prosecution's opening, Tom Little KC, the most senior prosecutor in this country, argued that Martin Blake could have become angry or frustrated, and that the firing was not justified, nor was it justifiable. Well, a jury has taken the other view. They've taken the side of the defence here, that Martin Blake fired that round at Chris Caba because he believed that the lives of his colleagues were at risk. They were within an area that another officer referred to as the triangle of death, the area in front of the vehicle where officers could have been pulled under the wheels as it reversed. The prosecutor, by contrast, referred to how the vehicle was only going between 8 miles per hour or 12 miles per hour. In its various forwards and backwards motions caught in that collapse between several cars. But that 17 seconds of footage played over and over again between Chris Caba's Audi and the BMW and a parked Tesla on the side was enough to convince the jury that the firing of that weapon by Martin Blake was done in reasonable self-defence and the defence of his colleagues' lives. The footage is total chaos. Martin Blake and the other armed officers are seen calling doors, 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 the order you give when you exit a vehicle as an armed firearms officer. They're also shown calling out armed police, telling Chris Caba to stop the vehicle, to get out of the vehicle, as is the direct order given in an enforced stop. But that's not what followed. That's not the order that was received. Chris Caba driving the car backwards and forwards between those vehicles. The prosecution's case was that there was not a realistic case of or potential risk of death here, and that the firearms officer, Sergeant Blake, known throughout this trial, also in his cipher NX121, was firing due to anger and due to frustration. The defence's case was rather that our armed firearms officers, those AFOs, were at grave risk. Those authorised officers were facing risk to life, and they had to operate in that split-second moment. Now, Martin Blake's defending barrister regularly referred to him as not being a Robocop, not able to take in all the sights and sounds in instances of such a highly charged and chaotic scenario, that he was relying on instinct and training. We also heard that he wasn't even meant to be on duty that night, moving along from another behind-a-desk role as a supervisor tactical firearms officer, instead swapping shifts and being put in one of those AFO cars at short notice. But it's the defence in their case that Martin Blake fired that weapon, fired that fatal shot justifiably, that the jury has returned, clearing Martin Blake of murder.
OK, Charlie Peters, thank you very much for that. And this story is absolutely getting you riled up on gbnews.com/your say. First of all, I should add that just reading some notes from the court decision this evening. A fellow firearms officer who was with Martin Blake on that job said he himself would have taken a shot if Mr Blake hadn't. And that was backed up by another colleague, a second colleague, who also said he was fractions of a second away from doing the same. Jurors heard that Mr Blake had never fired a gun at a human being before or seen a gun fired at a human being before the night Mr Caba died. So there we go. Martin Blake cleared in the murder trial of Chris Caba in Streatham in South East London in September 2022. It was a story that prompted dozens of Met Police firearms officers to hand in their guns and their weapons in protest at the decision. Why did it ever go to court in the first place? Grumpy Grandad, you have said the police marksman should never have gone to trial. He was doing the job he was paid to do. David Clark, you've said it's a disgrace that an experienced 40-year-old policeman was put through this by the CPS. Shame on them. And Helen, you said, I'm so relieved to hear the policeman has been exonerated with regards to the shooting of Chris Caba. So pleased for him and his family. This should have never have gone to court. Keep those comments coming in, gbnews.com/your say. We'll get some more reaction from that when we have it. And it just reminds me as well, actually, of not just the Met Police firearms officers, but also the SAS and our special forces on operations in Afghanistan. You're expecting these people, these brave men, these brave women, to go onto operations to chase down terrorists, to chase down criminals. They're faced with split-second decisions of life or death. Do I pull the trigger? Do I wait? Is this person a terrorist? Is it a hostage? These are supremely trained soldiers and police officers, and yet it seems to me, and I think many of you will agree with me, that we just seem to, kind of desert them in their time in need. Again, I refer to operations abroad. Anyway, gbnews.com/your say. Let me know what you think about that. Lots more to come between now and 5 o'clock, but first, your news headlines with Katie Bowen.
Ben, thank you. Your top stories at 4:30. As you've been hearing, breaking news this afternoon. Metropolitan Police firearms officer Martin Blake has been cleared of the murder of Chris Caba, who was fatally shot in South East London on the 5th of September 2022. Mr Blake, who is 40, stood trial at the Old Bailey after shooting the 24-year-old through the front windscreen of a car. The car had been used as a getaway vehicle in a shooting the previous evening and was hemmed in by police cars after an officer recognised its registration number. Mr Caba drove backwards and forwards, trying to ram his way free. Mr Blake told jurors he believed one of his colleagues was about to die, and so he opened fire to stop the car. The Crown Prosecution Service has defended its decision to prosecute the cleared firearms officer, saying it was right to put the case before a jury for them to scrutinise and to decide. A reminder there of that breaking news. Martin Blake, a former Metropolitan Police firearms officer, has been cleared of the murder of Chris Caba. Speaking in Parliament a short time ago, the Home Secretary has vowed to end hotel use by clearing the backlog of Home Office decisions on asylum claims. Yvette Cooper said that the government had inherited an asylum backlog that was increasing. She vowed to fix asylum decision-making processes in order to clear the backlog and end hotel use. The Home Secretary also said that agreements to stop small boats reaching the English Channel before migrants board would not be possible without international law. The Prime Minister has asked the British public to share their experiences and ideas to help fix the NHS, adding there's a need for the health service to move towards more digital systems. Meanwhile, Health Secretary Wes Streeting said the NHS is going through what is objectively the worst crisis in its history, with some patients receiving what he described as a death sentence because of the service's failings. Sir Keir Starmer and Mr Streeting were giving a speech in East London this morning as they launched the party's health service consultation about the institution's next decade. The Prime Minister said NHS workers deserve a lot better than what has happened over the last 14 years. A senator has confronted the King in Australia's Parliament, shouting, "This is not your land, you are not my king." The incident happened after His Majesty finished an address at Australia's Parliament House on the second official day of his engagements in the country. Lydia Thorpe interrupted the ceremony in the capital city of Canberra by shouting for about a minute before she was escorted away by security.
You are a genocide! This is not your land! This is not your land! You are not my kids! You are not our kids!
The ceremony was then concluded without any reference to the incident, and the royal couple proceeded to meet the public who'd waited outside the building to greet them. Their Majesties are on a 6-day tour of the country. They've also visited the Australian National Botanic Gardens this afternoon. It's the King's first visit to Australia since becoming monarch. Those are your latest GB News headlines. More from me in half an hour.
For the very latest GB News direct to your smartphone, sign up to News Alerts by scanning the QR code or go to gbnews.com/alerts.
Afternoon, welcome to your latest update from the Met Office here on GB News. Overnight, many of us will have some decent clear spells, but a bit of fog is likely across the southeast, and there will be some outbreaks of rain trickling south. We've had a damp day across the far southeast. That rain is scooting away, but showery rain pushing in across Scotland and Northern Ireland this evening, so some wet weather for a time, and that'll scoot south into parts of northern England and Wales by morning. Ahead of that, though, some clear skies, apart from that mist and fog across the southeast. Turning quite chilly, actually. Temperatures well down into single figures in rural spots. This zone of cloudy weather will help to keep the temperatures up. Will make for a fairly grey start in the morning over northwest England and West Wales, and we'll see some showery rain getting into the southeast too. And that mist and fog could still be around across the southeast. Bear that in mind first thing tomorrow morning. Further north, we'll see some brighter skies and some good spells of sunshine, but showers will again be moving in on a brisk breeze across the northwest of Scotland. They'll, by and large, keep going on and off throughout the day, and this zone of cloudier weather will push southwards. So after some early sunshine, I suspect it will turn quite grey across East Anglia and the southeast. The rain, though, will fizzle out, so you might just catch a light shower, but many places will be dry. Brightening up across Wales and northern England. Come the afternoon, some good spells of sunshine here and for the southwest of England. Temperatures, again, getting into the teens, so feeling quite pleasant in the sunny spells. Most areas having quite light winds, although still quite breezy in northern Scotland. And it will be again here on Wednesday with a little bit of light rain and drizzle in the northwest. The odd light shower across the south. Again, fog could be a bit of a problem for Wednesday morning, but once that's cleared, many places looking dry and bright again. The winds will be increasing, particularly across the north and the west, but so will the temperatures, ticking up to 16 or 17 degrees for most of us.
The latest GB News travel.
The M25 clockwise still out of action following emergency repairs due to an earlier lorry fire from junction 5 at Sevenoaks to junction 6 at Godstone. For South Yorkshire, there's a lane closure on the M1 southbound. That's been causing heavy traffic due to an accident from junction 33 at Catcliffe on towards junction 32 at the M18 interchange. Heading to Bristol in the M5 northbound, there's a lane closure on the exit slip road at junction 18 at the M49. That's all due to a lorry having a tyre change. Traffic does seem to be coping well. For Cheshire, severe delays due to an earlier overturned vehicle. That's on the M6 southbound from junction 19 at Knutsford on towards junction 18 as you approach Holmes Chapel. For now, that's the very latest travel update.
You can stay up to date throughout the day by visiting our website, gbnews.com.
Hello, welcome back. Ben Leo with you on GB News this afternoon. Back to that breaking news from the last 10-15 minutes or so. Met Police marksman Martin Blake, who's 40 years old, he's been cleared of the murder of 24-year-old Chris Caba, who was fatally shot in Streatham, southwest London, on September the 5th, 2022. The murder charge brought against Martin Blake had sparked fury among firearms officers, with dozens downing tools in apparent protest, and even the army being put on standby to plug the gap. Let's get the latest now with GB News national reporter Charlie Peters. Charlie, big afternoon at the Old Bailey, not least for Martin Blake's family.
That's right, Ben. Big news for Martin Blake, who it appears, was briefly overwhelmed by emotion when this ruling was passed. After the jury deliberated for just 3 hours, Mr. Caba's family, by contrast, reacted in silence. But it's worth noting that after Chris Caba was shot in September 2022, there were protests in London, and for years now since that killing, the family of Chris Caba have been demanding what they call justice in relation to this case. Supporters of Martin Blake will now say that justice has been done, as the authorised firearms officer has been cleared of murder, following a lengthy investigation by the Independent Office for Police Conduct, and then also, of course, charges being brought by the CPS, prosecuted by Tom Little KC, the most senior prosecutor in England and Wales, who said that it was the prosecution's case that Martin Blake, the 40-year-old officer, could have become overwhelmed by anger and frustration when he shot Chris Caba on that evening 2 years ago. He said that the shooting was neither justified nor justifiable. The defence referred to the fact that the car that Chris Caba was driving, the Audi, was linked on the police database, the intelligence centre. It was flagged by ANPR due to being linked to a shooting incident that had occurred in Brixton the evening before the incident. But the jury deliberating for just 3 hours today to clear Blake after that incident 2 years ago, where a helicopter and also 6 patrol cars, both marked and unmarked, were involved in that stop, the enforced stop, on the night of the 5th of September 2022. This shooting occurring just outside a school nearby to Brixton in Streatham. Now, Mr. Caba knew he was being followed by the police officers. He told a friend on the phone, "I think there is police behind me." He turned into Kirkstall Gardens in Streatham. That's the street you're seeing on your screens now. And as he made that turning, a marked vehicle was ahead of him. A marked vehicle, an ARV, an armed response vehicle, caused the Audi to stop. And then behind him, they called the enforced stop, and the unmarked vehicles closed in, trying to create a blockade where Chris Caba couldn't drive out of the situation he was in. But he did try. First reversing and then going forward and hitting Martin Blake's car. And it was as he reversed again in those 17 seconds of chaos that Martin Blake called doors. That is, he shouted to his colleagues that he was going to exit the vehicle and take up a position to intervene with the situation, that he then fired, having come around in front of the vehicle, in front of the Audi that Chris Caba was driving, and firing a shot as he had reversed. He denied that he intended to fire a fatal shot. He said he was only seeking to incapacitate Chris Caba, despite the round he fired, breaking through the windscreen and hitting Chris Caba in the head. Other AFOs then went in to perform CPR, but he was pronounced dead shortly after. Now, there was a big march for justice, as I said, many people saying with placards, with Black Lives Matter placards on central London. We expect that this decision will, of course, split national moods on this issue. It has been a divisive situation, but for Martin Blake, this is a day where he has achieved the justice that he set out to get.
OK, fascinating. Charlie Peters, thank you for that update. And yes, Charlie mentioned it, the protest from Black Lives Matters and other groups in the wake of that incident. I hope not. Are we going to see something similar in the wake of this decision? But, yeah, remains to be seen. OK, let's move on. An Indigenous politician has caused quite the stir, you have to say, overnight in Australia after heckling King Charles following a speech at Parliament House in the Aussie capital, Canberra. Independent Senator Lydia Thorpe accused the royal family of committing genocide, saying the monarch should, quote, answer for the thousands of massacre sites throughout the country. Let's take a look. OK, let's get the thoughts from a former royal correspondent at the Sun newspaper, Charles Ray. Good afternoon, Charles. Do you reckon the King would have been rocked or unsteadied by those scenes, or was she just a vocal minority?
Good afternoon, Ben. No, I don't think King Charles would have been much bothered at all by that protest. I mean, he's used to these sort of mini protests that go along. And it's interesting, though, that this lady was actually invited to that event, and knowing what she was like, the organisers actually said to the palace, look, this Lydia Thorpe is invited. It's entirely up to you. Do you want her to be there? If you don't, then we'll tell her to, go away. And they said, no, they decided it would be disrespectful to ban her from being there. Now, she's had her 5 minutes of fame. And in contrast, when the couple, the King and the Queen, left that building, they stepped out into the bright sunshine, and there were thousands and thousands of people there wanting to sort of cheer and shout, for the King. So that just goes to show the level that you've got between people who are like Lydia Thorpe, who's been condemned as well by other Indigenous leaders out there for being disrespectful and for being very rude.
Charles, you are a journalist of over 50 years. You first started reporting on the royals in, what, 88, 89 at some point?
Something like that, yes.
You must have seen...
You know that.
Sorry for reminding you. You must have seen your fair share of protests and heckling on royal tours in, yesteryear. Sure. Are the royals... I mean, how generally do they take it? Do they sort of have a word with each other and pull a Gordon Brown and say, bigoted woman? Or how do they take it?
Well, first of all, they make sure there's no microphones around, unlike Gordon Brown. No, I mean, I'm sure if Charles and Camilla are sitting having a cup of tea a bit later, they'll go through the day, they'll talk about it, and they'll certainly discuss that woman's viewpoint, but it won't cause any grief. I mean, we have to remember, around about the 70s, the Queen was on her horse when 4 or 6 shots were fired. It turns out they were blanks, but nobody knew that at the time, and she stayed steady on that horse. So that's the sort of most severe example that I can remember. Other times it's just straightforward people wanting to put their point of view. We actually have out there in Australia a man called Graham Smith, who is the chairman or president of Britain's Republic. Now he's out there with his flag, and it's just him and his flag, and that's his protest. That's entirely up to him. He spent a lot of money to get there.
Yeah. OK, Charles, thank you for being with us this afternoon. Appreciate your presence. We'll catch up soon. Thank you. Coming up, gender fluid, cisgender and neutral gender, intersex, pangender, bigender, autigender. Do you know what that is? Well, they're just a few examples of the 24 genders the SNP claim are the real deal in Scotland, as the government is accused of being, quote, disconnected from the real world. I'm Ben Leo on GB News, Britain's news channel. Back in a tick.
I'm Stephen Dixon, and thanks for joining us on GB News, Britain's news channel.
This is Britain's Newsroom, where your voice matters.
It's just astonishing. With expert analysis and honest opinion, we don't just keep you informed.
We bring you unique perspectives you won't see anywhere else.
Can't argue with any of that. When the news happens, it happens here.
On Britain's Newsroom, weekdays from 9:30 a.m.
Only on GB News.
GB News Breakfast, every day from 6 a.m.
Right, we're having beans this morning.
Beans for breakfast. There's no better breakfast, is there?
I like beans on toast for breakfast.
So do I. I would actually call myself a baked beans connoisseur.
Would you? Well, we can put you to the test. Tell us what the story is.
The story is, you might think beans, you might think Heinz. Heinz means beans.
Beans means Heinz.
Beans means Heinz. Heinz means beans. Who knows? So, of all of the supermarket baked beans, it is actually the Aldi supermarket version, this version over here, which came out on top. The Bramwell's baked beans, 76% on the taste test.
And they're much cheaper as well.
Much cheaper. Households can save, if you're buying 2 cans a week, £100 a year buying the Aldi version of these baked beans. So we thought we're going to do a blind taste test this morning.
Yes, so we've got the Aldi beans, we've got M&S beans, and we've got
Beans, Heinz. So I think number 2 is the best one.
Yeah, I agree.
Right,
Two came first best to me.
So the Heinz is number 3.
Interesting.
Which was the worst one?
Which is the worst one, which is the ones, actually, I'll buy it home.
Do you know what? That's just proven it. M&S was number 1. And Aldi was number 2, which was our favourite as well.
I said M&S.
Yeah, and we both said Aldi.
We did say Aldi. I have to be honest, I was not expecting that.
I told you. This is the hill I will die on.
that
These
one.
are the beans that I get at home and I love them.
At university, you get the tin that's half that size, and it was 21p for the store ones and 23p for Heinz baked beans. And as I say, the key was in the thickness of the sauce and how hard the beans were.
They actually are really nice. They're really. I am really surprised, and we buy more than 2 cans a week, so it saved me a couple of £100.
We get through 2 cans.
So you like the Aldi
in
ones?
city.
I like the Aldi ones. I'm shocked.
They're a lot
There you go.
cheaper. Yeah.
GB News, the People's Channel.
Join me, Nana Akwe, for an informative, interactive news programme with a difference. It's fun.
No, he didn't say that, though.
I'm so surprised.
I think there's an element of truth to that.
Join me from 3 p.m. every weekend, only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
I'm Emily Carver. This is GB News, Britain's news channel.
Hello, welcome back. Ben Leo in for Martin Daubney, only on GB News. Now, gender fluid, cisgender and gender neutral are just 3 of the 24 genders the SNP claim are real, as the Scottish Government is being accused of being, quote, disconnected from the real world. Well, let's speak to Fiona McAnena from Sex Matters about this, frankly, quite balmy revelation. Fiona, surely we need to know who's bisexual, who's androgynous, who's, pansexual and whatever else they are. This is inclusive, isn't it? We need this.
Well, it's easy to laugh at this, isn't it? I think one of my favourites is pangender, which they say is an identity that encompasses all possible genders at once. I don't know what that looks like. But there is a serious point here, because actually you are right that we do need to know people's sexual orientation, because that sometimes has implications for service providers, for healthcare and so on. And obviously we need to know who's male and female, because that also has significant implications for their needs in public life, maternity provision, for example. But all this other stuff, I mean, most people can't even decode what these genders are. And it just becomes a distraction. And I think it really undermines people's confidence in whether the people in government are actually thinking.
Fiona, do you know what, one of the options on the SNP, the government website, is autigender. Do you know what that is? A-U-T-I, gender.
No, I don't, but it's an ever-changing menu. So even if they say it means one thing today, they'll also tell you that only a true autigender person can tell you what it means.
Right. Well, just to clarify, autigender is an autistic person who thinks about and relates to their gender label or lack of gender label in the context of autism. There's dozens more, but there's a serious point here, isn't there? The SNP, well, Nicola Sturgeon at least, her government was brought down by her obsession with self-ID. Why is the SNP still pursuing this kind of nonsense?
Well, it is quite bizarre, and they also, if you remember, went to court to defend their right in the census to allow people to just say they were a different sex from the one they were born. So they are very attached to this. I want to pick up a point about this autigender thing, which is quite a serious one, and that is there's a very high correlation between autism and being confused about whether you're male or female and getting caught up in this whole gender identity thing. And that's one of the biggest problems for children. You know, lots of the children who are referred to gender clinics in Scotland and England have autistic traits. They think very rigidly and they kind of latch onto this stuff. So it's actually rather serious. There's one other one in here that really struck me, and that's detransitioned. So one of the menu options the Scottish Government recognises is detransitioned. Now, we know that there are people recognising that this was a mistake for them. They, of course, were not born in the wrong body. But if you try to reverse some kind of medical transition, you have serious medical needs, and those are profoundly different whether you're male or female. So all of these genders have got male and female versions. except detransitioned, which is heartbreaking because actually a detransitioned male and a detransitioned female, those are emerging healthcare specialist areas, and I don't think they're getting the attention they need.
OK, yeah, good point, Fiona. It was a book previously claimed that the Tavistock Clinic, the infamous Tavistock Clinic, ignored evidence that 97.5% of children seeking sex changes had autism, depression or other problems. So, yeah, a point well made on that front. Fiona McInerney, thank you for being with us. You're from Sex Matters. Right, plenty more still to come in the next hour, including all the latest reaction to that bombshell decision at the Old Bailey this afternoon. Met officer has been cleared of the murder of Chris Caba in September 2022. Lots of detail from Charlie Peters, who's been listening to the decision, and lots of you on gbnews.com/your say singing the praises that finally he's been cleared. I'm Ben Leo on GB News, in for Martin Daubney. Stick with us in just a tick, but first your weather with Alex Deakin.
Heavy showers first thing will be followed by a warm, cosy day. Boxed boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Afternoon, welcome to your latest update from the Met Office here on GB News. Overnight, many of us will have some decent clear spells, but a bit of fog is likely across the southeast, and there will be some outbreaks of rain trickling south. We've had a damp day across the far southeast. That rain is scooting away, but showery rain pushing in across Scotland and Northern Ireland this evening, so some wet weather for a time, and that'll scoot south into parts of northern England and Wales by morning. Ahead of that, though, some clear skies, apart from that mist and fog across the southeast. Turning quite chilly, actually. Temperatures well down into single figures in rural spots. This zone of cloudy weather will help to keep the temperatures up. Will make for a fairly grey start in the morning over northwest England and West Wales, and we'll see some showery rain getting into the southeast too. And that mist and fog could still be around across the southeast. Bear that in mind first thing tomorrow morning. Further north, we'll see some brighter skies and some good spells of sunshine, but showers will again be moving in on a brisk breeze across the northwest of Scotland. They'll by and large keep going on and off throughout the day, and this zone of cloudier weather will push southwards. So after some early sunshine, I suspect it will turn quite grey across East Anglia and the southeast. The rain there will fizzle out, so you might just catch a light shower, but many places will be dry. Brightening up across Wales and northern England. Come the afternoon, some good spells of sunshine here and for the southwest of England. Temperatures again getting into the teens, so feeling quite pleasant in the sunny spells. Most areas having quite light winds, although still quite breezy in northern Scotland. And it will be again here on Wednesday with a little bit of light rain and drizzle in the northwest. The odd light shower across the south. Again, fog could be a bit of a problem for Wednesday morning, but once that's cleared, many places looking dry and bright again. The winds will be increasing, particularly across the north and the west, but so will the temperatures, ticking up to 16 or 17 degrees for most of us.
Woo! A chilly start will give way to a lovely, warm afternoon. Boxed heat pumps, sponsors of weather on GB News.
The latest GB News travel.
In Kent, the M25 clockwise remains closed this afternoon. That's following an earlier lorry fire and ongoing emergency repairs from Junction 5 at the M26 on towards Junction 6 at Godstone. And for Essex, there's a lane closure on the M11 northbound causing slow traffic due to emergency repairs between Junction 7A at Harlow North and Junction 8 at Bishop's Stortford. For Hertfordshire, severe delays due to an accident now on the hard shoulder of the M25 clockwise at Junction 25 Great Cambridge Road at Enfield. Congestion back towards Junction 23 at South Mims. For Surrey, there's a lane closure due to an obstruction on the M25 clockwise from Junction 8 at Reigate to Junction 9 at Leatherhead. That's the latest update.
You can stay up to date throughout the day by visiting our website gbnews.com.
This is the final week to grab your chance to win a whopping £36,000 cash in the Great British Giveaway. That's like having £3,000 each month for an entire year. Extra cash in your bank account that you can do whatever you like with. Make sure you don't miss out. Get your entry in now. Just one entry could make you the winner. For another chance to win £36,000 in tax-free cash, text CASH to 63232. One entry costs £2 £5 plus one standard network rate message, or text BONUS to 63232. 5 entries cost £5 plus one standard network rate message. You can enter online at gbnews.com/win. Entries start from just £2, or post your name and number to GB08 PO Box 8690 Derby DE1 9TT. UK only. Entrance must be 18 or over. Lines close 5 p.m. this Friday. Please check the closing time if listening or watching on demand. Good luck.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, for a frank and honest discussion with those in power that cuts through the spin and gets to the heart of the issues shaping our nation.
You haven't confirmed that you want to stand as leader, but you haven't ruled it out either.
This report basically says that he's not fit to stand trial. Is he indecisive? Incompetent?
I deliver the dose of reality Westminster needs. That's the Camilla Tominey Show at 9:30 every Sunday on GB News. The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hi there, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and I'm going to take a second to tell you all about my show, Dubes & Co. We start off with the issues of the day. We then bring in both sides of the arguments. We get rid of the disrespect, and then you throw me into the mix. And trust me, I'll tell it exactly how it is. And then, of course, the magic ingredient, you at home. We mix it all together, and what have we got? In my opinion, the best debate show in town. Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, it's 5 o'clock. Ben Leo with you for Martin Daubney here on GB News this afternoon. Some breaking news in the past hour. Metropolitan Police marksman Martin Blake, who's 40 years old, he's been cleared of the murder of 24-year-old Chris Caba, who was fatally shot in Streatham, South East London in September 2022. The murder charge brought against Martin Blake had sparked fury among firearms officers, with dozens downing tools in apparent protest and the army even being put on standby to plug the gap. Well, let's speak now with GB News national reporter Charlie Peters for the latest on this bombshell result. Charlie, what's been going on at the Old Bailey?
Well, as the verdict was brought in, Martin Blake appeared to be briefly overwhelmed with emotion. But the family of Chris Caba, who have appeared at every single day of this trial and were campaigning for years ahead of it, were silent as the not guilty verdict was returned. And we've just now had some reaction from the Crown Prosecution Service defending their decision to bring this case to the Crown Court, to the Old Bailey. They said that the decision to have Martin Blake face a trial was right, that the case was put before a jury for them to scrutinise and to decide. Now, the IOPC, the Independent Office of Police Conduct, has also put out a statement reacting to the news of Martin Blake, that authorised firearms officer being cleared of murder 2 years after he shot Chris Caba. The director, Amanda Rowe, said, firstly, we want to acknowledge that Chris Caba's family and friends today, as they continue to grieve his death more than 2 years on. Our thoughts and sympathies remain with them and everyone else who has been affected. They said the past few weeks must have been incredibly difficult and distressing for Chris's family, who have sat through the trial, listened to all the evidence and witnessed his final moments played out in court. And those final moments were played out over and over again. 17 seconds of chaos and madness from several different angles, as all of the AFO's body-worn footage were showed. Also footage from the vehicles involved in that enforced stop. Amanda Rowe went on to say that the IOPC's role is to independently investigate circumstances surrounding a fatal
we're going
police
to New
shooting.
Scotland Yard, sorry Charlie, where Met Police Commissioner Mark Rowley's giving a statement.
12 men and women have cleared Sergeant Martin Blake of murder. Over the past 2 years, Sergeant Blake has paid a huge personal and professional sacrifice. And this has been an incredibly difficult time for him and his family, and he has acted with professionalism and dignity throughout. This case has had an enormous impact on many. Chris Caba's family and friends continue to grieve the loss of a loved one, and today will be enormously difficult for them. Today's verdict is significant. No firearms officer sets out on duty intent on ending a life. Their sole purpose is the complete opposite: the protection and the preservation of life. Throughout the trial, the jury heard significant detail about the scenes facing Sergeant Blake that night. They were told that the car Mr. Caba was driving had been linked to a reported shooting the night before. The suspects were still at large and no gun had been recovered. Armed officers bravely intervened, not knowing the risks that they were about to face. The court heard that Mr. Caba tried to evade police, ramming his vehicle into others all around him. Sergeant Blake made a split-second decision on what he believed was necessary to protect his colleagues and to protect London. The jury decided that was an honestly held belief and that the force used was reasonable. Any fatal use of force understandably prompts huge concern amongst communities, particularly in black communities where trust in policing is low. There remains much for us to do to strengthen confidence in our service, and we know incidents like this place further strain on already challenged relationships. No police officer is above the law, but we have been clear that the system holding police to account is broken. I worry about the lack of support officers face for doing their best. But most of all, I worry for the public. The more we crush the spirit of good officers, the less they can fight crime. That risks London becoming less safe. Our armed officers respond to more than 4,000 incidents each year, but there are only 1 or 2 incidents where shots are fired. It is undeniable that they are the most professional, most accountable, and most cautious in their use of lethal force in the world. Their operations have prevented countless acts of violence across our city. Last year alone, they removed more than 400 guns from our streets. I remain humbled and deeply proud of officers who continue to protect London despite all the risks that they face. They continue to have my full and my unwavering support. Thank you.
OK, that was Met Chief Police Commissioner Sir Mark Rowley speaking outside New Scotland Yard there about today's verdict at the Old Bailey. Police Sergeant Martin Blake cleared of the murder of Chris Caba in Streatham in south-east London in September 2022. He's a free man. He's had this cloud over his head for the past 2 years, but the jury of 12 people at the Old Bailey this afternoon clearing him of murder. Sir Mark Rowley saying that police officers, armed officers, have removed more than 400 guns from the streets of London over the past year. He said no police officer is above the law, but the system that holds them to account is broken, and he warns that if this continues in the same fashion, going after armed police officers doing their job, it would crush, and is indeed crushing, their spirits. Let's go back to Charlie Peters, who is live for us, who's been following this case. Charlie, what did you make of Sir Mark Rowley's statement then?
The key line: no firearms officer sets out intent to kill. In fact, it's the opposite. They go out to conduct the protection and preservation of life. And that was central to Martin Blake's defence throughout this trial. He referred to how he fired not to kill, but to incapacitate. How he fired to protect the lives of his colleagues. The lives that he thought were at grave risk due to their positioning around Chris Caba's vehicle as it drove forward and backwards into the areas where they were stood, standing in an enforced stop, attempting to prevent Chris Caba from continuing to drive any further, as you've heard from the Met Commissioner there, Sir Mark Rowley, that car and the number plate on it was flagged by the ANPR system for being linked to a firearms incident in Brixton just the night before the fatal shooting of Chris Caba in September 2022. They were acting on intelligence, 6 vehicles and a helicopter tracking Chris Caba's vehicle. He knew he was being followed by the police. And as Sir Mark has said in that press briefing just then outside New Scotland Yard, he made that statement to say that, like all other firearms officers, he was acting without the intent to kill. Now, Martin Blake is just the 4th officer to be charged with murder or manslaughter after a firearms incident since 1990. And he has been cleared, as you heard, by 12 members of the jury who took just 3 hours to deliver that verdict after a lengthy trial in which the prosecution alleged that Martin Blake, that 40-year-old police sergeant, could have been angry and frustrated when taking that shot. They said that his decision was neither justified nor justifiable. During cross-examination by Tom Little, the chief barrister from the prosecution, he inquired as to why Martin Blake's post-incident evidence and testimony didn't add up with the events that actually happened. And we also heard from the defence side in the cross-examination of the other officers who appeared anonymously. It was a controversial decision by the Recorder of London, the chief judge at the Old Bailey, to name Martin Blake in this case. In the cross-examination of those other officers, they said it's important for many officers to give their verdicts after an incident because in the chaotic scenes that occur in such a violent incident, like an enforced stop on a vehicle linked to a firearms incident, instances can differ, perspectives can be blurred, people don't have perfect recollection when adrenaline is fueling their actions. But they did argue that the actions of Martin Blake were considered, they were measured, and they were done with the intent to protect the lives of his colleagues. We heard in evidence that one other member of that authorised firearms team said that they don't even practice situations where there was the shunting of a vehicle back and forward between cars because it's so dangerous. These officers are, of course, extremely well trained, but they don't train in the sort of realistic scenarios that they faced that night. They talk about the triangle of death, the area in front of the vehicle, the sort of vortex where you can be easily caught up and captured by the wheels and the bonnet of a car driving with speed and intent to cause danger and harm to life. And it was where Martin Blake was stood alongside another officer in that so-called triangle of death when he made the decision to take that shot. It wasn't intended, he said, to be a fatal shot, but that's what transpired when Chris Caba was hit in the head, the bullet flying through the windscreen of his Audi. Now, the prosecution said that that shot, as I've said, was inspired by anger and frustration, and that led to significant protests, Ben, in London at the time. Central London saw many people marching with Stand Up to Racism placards, people with Black Lives Matter on their placards, saying that there could be no justice and no peace after the incident. They made demands that this trial should be launched. They wanted Martin Blake to be charged with murder, and that's, of course, what happened. But Sir Mark Rowley there speaking about how this would have had an enormous impact on many, not just the family of Chris Caba, but also on Martin Blake, who's had this cloud hanging over him for 2 years, the turmoil he must have faced. That's what Sir Mark Rowley was referring to. He also pointed out, as you've noted, Ben, the hundreds of weapons that armed firearms officers have recovered in the previous year, pointing out how rare these incidents actually are, where officers take the decision to fire. It's not a decision they take lightly, and that's the defence that Martin Blake's team put forward at the Old Bailey in these last few weeks of this trial. This decision was not taken lightly at all. It was taken to protect the lives of his colleagues, the lives of those who were serving with him in the Metropolitan Police in the armed response vehicles. Now, I think we can show you some footage from that night, just released now by the Crown Prosecution Service and the IOPC. You can see NX121, that's the cipher for Martin Blake, stood there. This footage is happening just moments after that shot was taken. You can see that area I was referring to before, known as the Triangle of Death, where Martin Blake was stood when the car was ramming forwards and backwards. Now, the prosecution said that his decision to shoot at that point you're seeing now, paused on your screen, was controversial because Chris Caba's car was reversing. But the defence put forward the case that it was reversing, having just gone forwards and having almost caught one of Martin Blake's colleagues who he feared could have been pulled under the wheels in that incident. Another officer, also from a different angle, said that he also feared that an officer could have been pulled under the wheels during that incident. Now, firearms officers from both sides of this incident during the enforced stop, there was a marked vehicle at the front that vehicle there, and there's also a Charlie and an Alpha vehicle behind, which was an unmarked vehicle following Chris Caba for some time, for several minutes, when he was flagged by ANPR in Camberwell, New Greens sort of area, which is further north of Streatham, where he was stopped on Kirkstall Gardens. That's the address, the street you're seeing now. But that process, he knew he was being followed. He was on the phone, and he said as such to the person he was on the phone with, saying, "I know I've got police behind me." It would have been obvious when the armed firearms officers, the authorised officers, made that decision to call the enforced stop, putting him into that position where they thought he wouldn't be able to escape into that blockade. But it was Chris Caba's decision to drive his car forwards, backwards, and they said the wheel spin caused the reaction for Martin Blake to fire his weapon, that 40-year-old sergeant of the Metropolitan Police choosing to fire because he felt as though his colleagues' lives were at risk. It was less about his own life, more about his colleagues. That was the defence put forward regularly under cross-examination at the Old Bailey. Now, Martin Blake appeared overwhelmed with emotion as that jury verdict was returned this afternoon. The jury deliberating for just 3 hours to come to this decision. But we will also expect to hear from Chris Caba's family later at some point, because they have been campaigning for this trial for so long. We expect they will be bitterly disappointed with this decision.
Yes, indeed. Just reading some transcripts from the trial this afternoon, Charlie. If it wasn't going to be Martin Blake, it would have been his colleague who said that he was close to taking a shot if Mr Blake hadn't, and a second colleague said he too was fractions away. So it wasn't just Martin Blake who considered it a life and death situation. And in the last few minutes, the Crown Prosecution Service has defended its decision to prosecute Martin Blake. They said it was right that the case was put before the jury for them to scrutinise and to decide. Let us know what you think of that, gbnews.com/your say. Charlie Peters, thank you for that update. We'll catch up in the next hour. Don't go anywhere back home, because up next we'll be hearing from the family of Chris Caba from outside the Old Bailey with their first statement since that bombshell decision to acquit Martin Blake. I'm Ben Leo on GB News, Britain's news channel.
I'm Patrick Christie's. This is GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
We're proud to be GB News, the People's Channel, and as you know, we always love to hear your views. Now, there's a new way of getting in touch with us at gbnews.com/your say. By commenting, you can be part of a live conversation and join our GB News community. You can even talk to me, Bev Turner, or any of the members of the GB News family.
This is GB News, Britain's news channel.
Tell us about this film, because it's obviously come from your own experiences.
We wanted to create something for the entertainment industry that wasn't just another kind of dull documentary. I mean, some of them are brilliant, they're very informative, but you kind of leave a bit bewildered and a little bit kind of flat. So we thought, I've got a passion for writing and you've obviously got an unbounded knowledge on the subject. Why don't we create a film with a kind of satirical look on eating disorders?
So this came it's been made 20 years after your own...
It is 20 years.
20 years,
practically to the day.
So Samantha, you suffered with OCD and an eating disorder as well?
Yes.
And that's when your mum became a counsellor, is that right?
A little bit later on, I think we spent a bit of time in the system, and I realised that it wasn't working for us. So I took it on myself to learn as much as I could about the subject.
I call it a tragedy, probably the wrong word, but
No, it is a tragedy, because mental ill health and eating disorders destroy the lives of not only the sufferers but their families as well.
But you've turned that into something so positive and so
It's
inspiring.
amazing, really, that 20 years ago our story was just beginning, and 20 years on, we've done what we've done. But I have to say that very little has changed in the system.
I've heard that.
And I think that's what we're passionate about.
Yeah, so...
that was why we wanted to... I mean, I work with families every day, and I see the destruction that eating disorders and other mental illnesses not just bring to the sufferer, but the whole family.
Yeah.
And I think that's what really passions me, because obviously 20 years ago we were there. And I just feel that so much more needs to be done. And I think with eating disorders, there is still a lot of misunderstanding around the subject.
GB News, the People's Channel.
the GB newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens.
With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK.
We're ready to keep you up to date with what's happening every half an hour, every single day. Bulletins here on GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
I'm Ellie Costello, and thank you so much for joining us here on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello, welcome back. Ben Leo in for Martin Daubney this afternoon on GB News. Thanks for your company. Now, as the government launches a public consultation as part of its 10-year plan to save the NHS, Health Secretary Wes Streeting sat down with our very own political correspondent Catherine Forster to discuss his plans for our embattled health service.
Health Secretary, you've launched a conversation today, but what the public want to see, of course, is action. They want to be able to get an appointment with their GP more easily. They want those waiting lists to come down. When are people going to see a difference?
Action is already underway. We were elected back in July and we hit the ground running. We ended the junior doctor strikes, employed 1,000 more GPs onto the front line, and they'll be there in the coming months. And we've taken action on things like public health as well to stop the marketing of junk food ads at kids, for example. So we're already hitting the ground running. In the coming days, we'll be sending crack teams of top clinicians into hospitals with high waiting lists to help them do reform ways of working, taking some of the success we've seen in a small number of hospitals right across the country, particularly in areas that have been hardest hit. So we're not wasting any time on action. The reason why this national conversation is so important is that while we're getting the NHS back on its feet, this is a once-in-a-generation opportunity to have a real debate about the long-term future of our NHS. And we've come in as a government with a very clear sense of direction about what we want to achieve. We want to get care out of the hospital into the community, the NHS as much as a neighbourhood health service, a national health service. We want to drive the revolution in life sciences and medtech, big shift from analogue to digital. And thirdly, we want to keep people well, so a shift from not just treating sickness but preventing illness in the first place. The reason why this is so important, why people should log on today to change.nhs.uk, is I'm absolutely convinced the best way to reform the NHS isn't to do things to people, but with people. And I can't get enough of experts. So whether you use the NHS or whether you work in it, I bet you have seen examples of things that are inefficient. You see examples of waste. And you see things that, if you were in my shoes, in fact, you'd probably shout at the TV. You might even be shouting at the TV now saying, well, if I was in his shoes, I'd be doing this or that. Well, tell me, be part of it and be part of the debate about the future of the NHS.
It looks like the NHS going to be one of the big winners from the budget. It looks like there's going to be a lot of losers. But is that money going to enable you to do more than just stand still? Because you've got big plans for reform. You've made it clear that that's tied to, that the money is tied to changes. But are you going to be able to make that happen? Because we've heard these sorts of things before. For example, there was a long ongoing rail strike. It was supposed to be pay tied to reform. In the end, you gave train drivers a big pay rise, no reform whatsoever.
So the Chancellor and I are very clear, without giving away what she's going to say next week, Chancellor and I are very clear that any extra investment for the NHS must be linked to reform. Because the thing I'm really conscious of, and especially you mentioned the sort of the broader challenge we've got at the moment, where I think a lot of people are feeling the pinch in their own pockets as taxpayers. And when I look across the board at things that are just in a dire state in our public services, it's not just hospitals, it's schools, it's prisons, it's local councils, it's transport infrastructure. So there's no shortage of things we could do. We're not going to fix all those things in a single budget. But what we do need to do is pick some priorities. And if the Chancellor is giving me any additional resources she can spare for the NHS, I owe it to patients, to NHS staff and to taxpayers to make sure that money is well spent, and also to make sure the money that's already going into the NHS is well spent. And that's why, as well as doing the reform that's needed, we're also going to be waging war on waste. Because, as I say, I bet there are people watching who have seen examples of waste, and I want them to give me those examples so that we can get rid of them.
You're also, to get those waiting lists down, you're going to need GPs, hospital doctors working evenings and weekends. Previously been a lot of resistance to that. Do you think you're going to get that happening, and are you be prepared to take on the unions over that if necessary?
One of the things that I've been really struck by, not just in the last few months, but I've been right around the country talking to frontline NHS staff, I was also doing that when we were in opposition. NHS staff are crying out for change. These are people who are really committed to the NHS and even more committed to their patients, and they're ready to put their shoulders to the wheels with different ways of working. And that's why this process, this national conversation, is so important, because I can't fix the NHS on my own. I've got to mobilise a team of more than 1 million people who work in the NHS to do this with me, and I've got to involve millions further still in the debate about the long-term future of the NHS, which is why change.nhs.uk is such an important start to that national conversation.
You're also Secretary for Social Care. We're not hearing much about that at all. This government has come along, taken winter fuel payments off many pensioners. Are elderly people just not a priority? Is social care going to get kicked into the long grass yet again?
I can definitely reassure people social care is a priority for me. I'm the Secretary of State for Social Care, not just health. Today we are legislating for the first ever fair pay agreements for care workers and building a social care profession vital for its future. I'm also thinking really carefully with the Prime Minister right now about how we can not only build the 10-year plan for social care with care users and care professionals, but also other political parties. Because since the general election, I mean, the Tories haven't apologised for the mess they've left the country in, but they have at least said we're willing to work with the government on social care reform. And interestingly, the Liberal Democrats and the Reform Party all willing to work with us. So we're thinking right now, what's the best way to involve them in that? We'll have more to say about that shortly.
Might that be a royal commission?
And I think that's for the Prime Minister to decide the exact vehicle, but we're talking about the way in which we can get the parties around the table. We've all got our fair share of blame on social care, and we've all got a responsibility to work together to fix it.
Secretary of State, thank you.
OK, that's our very own Catherine Forster's interview with Health Secretary Wes Streeting a bit earlier today. Let's get reaction now to what we just heard from former Medical Director and Chief Medical Officer of Bupa, Dr Andrew Vallance-Owen. Good afternoon, Doctor. Thank you for joining me. Lots of points to go out there. Why don't we start with the war on waste in the NHS? What does that look like? Where might the Health Secretary begin?
It's a huge issue. Productivity is the other way of putting it, isn't it? And you know, I think regulation is part of the problem. There's been so much regulation that it has slowed things down. Doctors have said, well, they're doing less operations now than they did, 20 years ago when they trained, because of the sort of tightness of regulation. We need regulation system that actually drives improvement, not picks all the time to try and drive improvement in this waste situation. So I think that'll be, and there's a lot of good in the NHS too. There are some good hospitals and GP surgeries and all the rest of it, and we need to get the best of the NHS across into the worst of the NHS, and there's not enough effort being done on that, and I think that requires business management. There needs to be proper accountability for actually getting things done, and less meddling from the Department of Health and maybe even from politicians, so that the NHS can get on and deliver what they need to deliver.
And Doctor, Wes Streeting says that they need to hit the ground running, this government, with plans to reform, but the plan won't be published until spring next year, many, many months away. And this is indeed a 10-year plan, so that doesn't quite match up with his rhetoric, does it?
No, it doesn't. And, the talk from the NHS about this 10-year plan, it needs sorting very, very quickly. And, of course, they've got to work that through and not jump in and just make ideas from the centre without taking the NHS with them. But the NHS management has a crucial role here. They really have to recognise, and I don't think they really do, that real reform is needed. And the professions have to recognise that, and they have to work together with management, and that's been a problem. It's a sort of often a lot of tension between the two, to agree to make fundamental changes. And you know, changes like, you know, someone was suggesting you know, a 4-day week, because we're not using the capital and the operating theatres and the radiology equipment so much at the weekends. 4 days, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, then they get 3 days off, and the rest of the staff are working Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, and then they get 3 days off. And, you know, so we can actually, you know, it is a waste, coming back to that question, that our theatres, except in places where they're doing special work at the moment to try and get the waiting list down, are often not in use, and you're not able to get radiology and blood tests normally over the weekend.
Yeah, Dr. Andrew, I mean, let's be frank, is the NHS the answer anymore to, well, for this country? We've got an exploding population. The health service has had, or is receiving, more money than ever before. It seems like a bottomless pit. I mean, dare I say it, to the religious sector of the NHS, but, you know, do we need privatisation? Why should, I've said before on this programme, why should somebody earning 6 figures have full access to the NHS, which arguably clogs it up for the people it was intended for, people who are vulnerable, low incomes, so on and so on?
Well, I think they have to consider in their 10-year plan a much more radical, whether we should make more radical reform. But you can't do that overnight. It's a massive change to move to a social insurance system or something like that. I think working with the private sector is important. You know, they need more capacity. They are working, taking off a lot of patients from the NHS, but not enough. And I think that's a quite different thing to changing the system to some sort of social insurance system. And that does require a lot of work over the next few years, I think. It's such a massive change.
Yeah, mammoth task. I don't envy Wes Streeting at all. Dr. Andrew Valence-Owen, thank you very much for your time this afternoon. Plenty more coming up in just a few moments, but first, let's get some of your latest news headlines with Katie Bowen.
Ben, thank you. Your top stories at 5:30. As you've been hearing this afternoon, breaking news. Metropolitan Police firearms officer Martin Blake has been cleared of the murder of Chris Caba, who was fatally shot in South East London on the 5th of September 2022. Mr Blake, who is 40, stood trial at the Old Bailey after shooting the 24-year-old through the front windscreen of the car. The car had been used as a getaway vehicle in a shooting the previous evening and was hemmed in by police cars after an officer recognised its registration number. Mr Caba drove backwards and forwards, trying to ram his way free. Mr Blake told jurors he believed one of his colleagues was about to die, and so he opened fire to stop the car. Mr Caba's family said in a short time ago, "Today we are devastated. The not guilty verdict leaves us with the deep pain of injustice, adding to the unbearable sorrow we have felt since Chris was killed." Commissioner of the Metropolitan Police, Sir Mark Growley, said this in a statement a short time ago.
Over the past 2 years, Sergeant Blake has paid a huge personal and professional sacrifice. And this has been an incredibly difficult time for him and his family, and he has acted with professionalism and dignity throughout. This case has had an enormous impact on many. Chris Caba's family and friends continue to grieve the loss of a loved one, and today will be enormously difficult for them.
Elsewhere this afternoon, speaking in Parliament, the Home Secretary has vowed to end hotel use by clearing the backlog of Home Office decisions on asylum claims. Yvette Cooper said that the government had inherited an asylum backlog that was increasing. She vowed to fix asylum decision-making processes in order to clear the backlog and end hotel use. The Home Secretary also said that agreements to stop small boats reaching the English Channel before migrants board would not be possible without international law. A senator has confronted the King in Australia's Parliament, shouting, "This is not your land, you are not my King." The incident happened after His Majesty finished an address at Australia's Parliament House on the second official day of his engagements in the country. Lydia Thorpe interrupted the ceremony in the capital city of Canberra by shouting for about a minute before she was escorted away by security.
You are a genocide! This is not your land! This is not your land! You are not my King! You are not our King!
Well, the ceremony was then concluded without any reference to the incident, and the royal couple proceeded to meet the public who'd waited outside the building to greet them. Their Majesties are on a 6-day tour of the country. They've also visited the Australian National Botanic Gardens this afternoon. It's the King's first visit to Australia since becoming monarch. Those are your latest GB News headlines for now. Let's get your finance report.
For the very latest GB News direct to your smartphone, sign up to News Alerts by scanning the QR code or go to gbnews.com/alerts.
Cheers Britannia Wine Club proudly sponsors the GB News Financial Report.
Here's a quick snapshot of today's markets. The pound will buy you $1.2984 and €1.999. The price of gold is £2,095 and 64 pence per ounce. And the FTSE 100s close the day at 8,318 points.
Cheers Britannia Wine Club proudly sponsors the GB News Financial Report.
Thanks, Casey. Let's get more now from GB News national reporter Charlie Peters on that breaking news over the past hour. Met officer Martin Blake's been cleared of murdering Chris Caba in that incident in Streatham, South East London in September 2022. Charlie, what's been going on at the Old Bailey?
We've just had a statement from the family of Chris Caba come in, Ben. They're saying that they are feeling unimaginable sorrow after this decision where Martin Blake was found not guilty of shooting and murdering Chris Caba 2 years ago in Streatham. They refer to the fact that they are devastated. They say that they are feeling a deep pain of injustice. There is an unbearable sorrow that they have felt since Chris was killed. And then referring to their unimaginable grief, the family said, "Our son deserved better." They said that this decision was a failure not just for the family, but to all of those affected by police violence. They said, "We won't be silenced." They're grateful to everyone who stood by us and fought for justice. "We will continue fighting for Chris and for real change." They said Chris's life mattered and nothing can take that away from us. That statement coming in from Chris Caba's family in the last few moments after Martin Blake was cleared of murdering Chris Caba 2 years ago in Streatham.
OK, Charlie Peters, thanks very much for that. Keep your comments coming in on the Chris Caba decision. If you want to get in touch, simply go to gbnews.com/your say. I will endeavour to read all of your latest comments out before the show is out at 6 o'clock. Jubes is on from 6, by the way, do not forget. I'm Ben Leo on GB News, in for Martin Daubney all this week. This is Britain's News Channel. I'll be back in a tick.
Afternoon, welcome to your latest update from the Met Office here on GB News. Overnight, many of us will have some decent clear spells, but a bit of fog is likely across the southeast, and there will be some outbreaks of rain trickling south. We've had a damp day across the far southeast. That rain is scooting away, but showery rain pushing in across Scotland and Northern Ireland this evening, so some wet weather for a time, and that'll scoot south into parts of northern England and Wales by morning. Ahead of that, though, some clear skies, apart from that mist and fog across the southeast. Turning quite chilly, actually. Temperatures well down into single figures in rural spots. This zone of cloudier weather will help to keep the temperatures up. Will make for a fairly grey start in the morning over northwest England and West Wales, and we'll see some showery rain getting into the southeast too. And that mist and fog could still be around across the southeast. Bear that in mind first thing tomorrow morning. Further north, we'll see some brighter skies and some good spells of sunshine, but showers will again be moving in on a brisk breeze across the northwest of Scotland. They'll, by and large, keep going on and off throughout the day, and this zone of cloudier weather will push southwards. So after some early sunshine, I suspect it will turn quite grey across East Anglia and the southeast. The rain will fizzle out, so you might just catch a light shower, but many places will be dry. Brightening up across Wales and northern England. Come the afternoon, some good spells of sunshine here and for the southwest of England. Temperatures again getting into the teens, so feeling quite pleasant in the sunny spells. Most areas having quite light winds, although still quite breezy in northern Scotland. And it will be again here on Wednesday with a little bit of light rain and drizzle in the northwest. The odd light shower across the south. Again, fog could be a bit of a problem for Wednesday morning, but once that's cleared, many places looking dry and bright again. The winds will be increasing, particularly across the north and the west, but so will the temperatures, ticking up to 16 or 17 degrees for most of us.
The latest GB News travel.
Good evening, I'm Johnny Ratner. Big problems in Lancashire to the east of Accrington. The A56 remains closed between the Rising Bridge roundabout through to Huncote at the scene of a serious accident where a lorry drove into the central reservation and a lorry caught fire around 10 o'clock last night on the Kent stretch of the M25. So the clockwise carriageway of the motorway has been closed all day, right on the Kent-Surrey border, in fact, between the M26 and Godstone, where those emergency resurfacing repair works are underway. It also means the westbound M26 is closed approaching the M25 and back to the M25 anti-clockwise heading out of Kent into Essex. Long queues where the right-hand Dartford Tunnel is also closed for emergency repairs. In southwest London at Putney, the South Circular blocked off the A3 after a lorry got struck on the bridge. And in Devon, northwest of Kingsbridge, the A379 closed at Avedon Gifford after a tractor overturned. That's the latest.
You can stay up to date throughout the day by visiting our website, gbnews.com.
Welcome back. Ben Leo in for Martin Daubney this afternoon on GB News. Now, at this channel, we love to hear what you think. So every day, we'll be running our poll of the day. And today, we've been asking, do you trust Labour not to hike taxes on working people? The results are in, and they're quite evident. 99% of you say no, you do not trust this Labour government to raise taxes on working people. Just 1% of you say you do trust Labour. For all our latest polls, poll news and how to vote in the future, just go to gbnews.com/poll. Well, to discuss this latest poll now is Maxwell Marlowe from the director... Sorry, you are the director of research at the Adam Smith Institute. 99% of our viewers say they don't trust Labour to raise taxes on working people. First of all, what is a working person? Because Labour seem to have been quite tricky with their language here and still aren't really clarifying what that means.
Well, it depends how you want to define it, as you point out, right? I mean, I think people who, take a risk with their money, who, start a business, innovate and are entrepreneurs, I think they're working people as much as anyone else we'd consider a working person. So I think what Labour are trying to go for here, and I'm going to say the government more formally, I think they're going for the core voter. That is... the people who voted for them in our constituencies, it's people who, are doing a 9 to 5, who have felt the pinch over the last few years and have felt let down by the last government. No surprise there. So when we saw in the manifesto periods, they wouldn't raise, income tax, they wouldn't raise VAT, they wouldn't raise national insurance, but they didn't qualify which national insurance. And let's be clear here, Ben, if you raise employers' national insurance, it's going to hit your pay rise. It's probably going to increase unemployment for working people again. If you're not in work, are you a working person? Who knows? But more seriously, though, I really think this is going to punch the economy in the gut, and it's going to be very, very serious.
Yes. So, talking of working people, there's talks of a rise in fuel duty. I mean, first of all, does this government not think that people who drive cars are working people?
Well, I'm not sure what they're thinking, to be honest, but this has been a long-running campaign by The Sun, as we know. 15 years. Harry Cole's been very happy to go out and say another victory for The Sun, fuel duty frozen. I personally feel really sorry for the economists on the fuel duty desk at the Treasury. Every year they say, please let us raise it, and they can't. I think what they're going for here, though, is this is about climate change, and this is about, externality mitigation, as we'd call it. And also, what I'm interested to see coming up is going to be how they're going to deal with electric vehicles, because electric vehicles, as you know, they're heavier, they cause more damage to roads, and that is a real difficulty for local government and for everyday people up and down the country. You'll pay more on your drive to work, and the potholes that are increasingly appearing and they're more dangerous. How are you going to deal with that fiscally? So big questions.
OK, come on then. Your institute is based in the heart of Whitehall. You are amongst it all. You're amongst the pigeons. What credible leaks have you heard from the budget next week? What can we expect?
We're hearing that essentially we're going to see an increase in capital gains tax on shares, not on second homes. That's important to qualify. So that means whenever you make a capital gain, so you put some money in, £100 in a share, and it goes up maybe £15 over a year, you'll have to pay tax on that. And they're going to raise that up to what would be comparable to what would essentially be one of the highest rates in Europe, so making us very uncompetitive for investors.
Great.
We're also going to see a change to inheritance tax, Britain's most hated tax. We call it the death tax. We'll see agricultural and business reliefs removed from that, and they'll increase the gift period from 7 to 10 years, as well as a devastating attack on non-doms as well. So really, really concerning stuff from this monstrous budget.
Wow, Maxwell, aspiration nation, you might say. What's the point of even, risking your money, investing and leaving something for your kids? Because this Labour government, it seems, we don't know yet, but, it seems, we'll find out next week, that they might be just coming for it. Thank you, Maxwell Marlow. You're the Director of Research and Education at the Adam Smith Institute. Now, let's move on. The days of passing your driving test and taking your mates for a spin could well be over, because you might have to put the handbrake on, as the AA is recommending new under 21-year-old drivers should not be carrying similar-aged passengers within the first 6 months on the road. What do you think about that? Good idea? Bad idea? Are we curtailing their liberties? Well, they argue it could save 58 lives a year. Is that it? 58? I mean, every death is a tragedy, but in the grand scheme of things, 58 lives a year saved. But is it time to crack down on young drivers? Joining us now is British racing driver and former co-presenter of Top Gear, Tiff Needell. Tiff, thank you for joining us. Look, I don't want to be flimsy with the figure here, saying just 58 lives, because, when somebody dies on the road, not only is that person affected, I mean, they're gone, but the family, the grieving, it's an everlasting pain. But is this a good idea to curtail so many freedoms and liberties for really a small return?
I actually think it is. I think it must be too draconian. It's something I've talked about for years, ever since I read an awful story 5 or 10 years ago, and a kid passes his driving test. They drive their cars to school now. Your mates get in at lunchtime, and 5 minutes later they've hit a lamppost and there's some fatalities. So it's very hard to write the regulation. I came up with an idea that, for the first 3 months, if you're taking passengers, one of them must also have already got their driving licence. So you've got an experienced driver with you. It's got to be crept in. There's also got to be massive amounts of education, because it's not just the driver that might be being stupid. The problem is if you get 4 lads in the car, go on, mate, go on, give it some, and the music's turned up and get the boom, boom going. And there's too many distractions. So you do need an element of responsibility. But of course, 99% of the kids passing the driving test, they are responsible. So you can't sort of punish a lot of them, just because there are a few wild incidents. But, if you've been waiting 17 and a half years to take your girlfriend out in your car for a drive, you could probably wait another 3 months or something. So, yes, something. There needs to be some cushion, then education to say why there's that cushion. Parents must be involved. Who you get out with tonight? Tell kids, don't get in the car if you know your mate's been drinking. If they've been taking drugs, don't get in the car with them. And when you do get in the car, I guess that's common sense advice. But I mean, where does it end? Do you then start banning music for under 21-year-olds? Do you set decibel level limits? Do you set boundaries of the UK where you can't go beyond 200 miles if you're 21? Well, no, obviously not. You're going too far as you typically might. But some sort of gentle, little bit of, legislation that would wake people up to the fact that they're out, they've got other people's lives they're responsible for. And maybe horsepower. Maybe, you're not allowed to drive a car with more than 300 or 500 horsepower, because otherwise if your 17-year-old gets into dad's 600 horsepower Ferrari, you might not be quite used to it. So perhaps but more guidelines and education for everyone involved.
Yeah. OK, interesting debate. Tiff Needell, thank you for joining us this afternoon. Yeah, I was 17 when I passed. I failed the first time because I think I should have passed first time, but they said I was following too closely. The second time, I pulled into the test centre and they said, why did you fail the first time? And I said, I was following too closely. And they said, well, you did it again, but I'm going to pass you. So luckily, they gave me my badges. Anyway, let us know what you think on that. gbnews.com/your say. Coming up, £650,000 worth in taxpayers' money went on, guess this, Pride-related events, including rainbow-coloured fudge and zebra crossings. A good way to spend taxpayer money? We'll be looking into that just after the break. I'm Ben Leo on GB News. Back in just a sec.
Welcome to State of the Nation, daily plunge into the stories shaping our country. I'm Jacob Rees-Mogg, and Monday to Thursday we bring you the insights, the facts, the truth about how our country is being governed. Because what happens in Downing Street matters down your street. Tune in to State of the Nation every Monday to Thursday, 8 to 9 o'clock. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Sunday with Michael Portillo from 11, only on GB News.
Serving some of the most talked about food in Chelsea, executive head chef of Number 50 Cheney, Ian Smith, has created a range of menus with a hint of the homeland, using the finest British ingredients sourced by trusted suppliers. Ian Smith was head chef at Jason Atherton's Social Eating House and spent time in the kitchens of the Galvin brothers. Ian joins me now to tell more of the story. Tell me about Number 50 Cheney.
Yes, so we are a beautiful restaurant down in a corner of Chelsea on the Embankment with an amazing team. And we are really pride ourselves on, being an affordable luxury that people, really are wanting to return to week in, week out.
What's the view from your restaurant?
We can see the Embankment, the Thames, and Albert Bridge, which is very nice.
Very nice.
Actually lit up. Very romantic.
And tell me a little bit about your philosophy. I was talking there about having a touch of the homeland, British food, seasonal food.
Yes. Yeah, I think, for me, great cooking is, with simplicity on finest ingredients, cooked with simplicity, and ultimately, there to be enjoyed through... Yeah, sorry.
No, I didn't mean to interrupt you. I was going to say, it starts as a young person's business. You went into it very young, didn't you? 15?
Yes. Yeah, so I was 15. I sat in my parents' bedroom, called the Ritz, the Dorchester and Claridge's, and very luckily, a man on the end of the phone, 21 years ago, sent me on to a college course called the Specialised Chef Scholarship. 3 days later, I had a Ritz stamp letter through the post, and off me and my parents went, and luckily I got on the course.
And how old were you when you got your first responsibility, would you say?
I think the biggest responsibility in my career is today. Leading Number 50 Cheney.
GB News, the People's Channel.
It's Patrick Christie's Tonight, and here we do things differently. It's explaining the absolute madness of this, doesn't it? It's explosive. This is very good. It's lively.
850. Your government sat there, Sean, and it did nothing.
It's controversial. And the Middle East has been in turmoil since before I was born. It's everything you need to kickstart your evening. Everyone's had their Weetabix tonight. I love to see it. That's Patrick Christie's Tonight, weeknights from 9 p.m. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back. Ben Leo in for Martin Daubney this afternoon on GB News. Just on the topic of young drivers, 21-year-olds, it's been mooted that they shouldn't have passengers of the same age until they're a bit more mature on the road, whatever that looks like. Dick, you said, I hate tailgating, Ben. I hope you still don't do it. No, I rarely drive anymore, actually. I can't be bothered. The roads are so busy half the time. Sharon, you say, I once dumped a boyfriend on the spot in a car as he thought it was clever to do a donut with me still inside. Archie said, new drivers... One life lost caused through an inexperienced driver is a bonus. I think anyone who passes their test should only be allowed to have passengers of any age after a year of driving. And Michael, you say, Ben, you sound as though you equate common sense and youth go hand in hand. Nothing could be further from the truth. I don't know. I know some, mature 21-year-olds. Anyway, let's move on. Now, how do you feel about valuable tax money being spent on pride events? Because the taxpayers forked out last year £650,000 in funding for LGBT-themed events that rocketed by 100 grand over a year. And that's included things such as rainbow crossings, as you can see here, rainbow-coloured fudge and all sorts of pride paraphernalia. That's according to research from the Taxpayers Alliance. Joining me now is Diversity and Inclusion Facilitator Casey John Went. For Casey, some people would argue this is a complete waste of taxpayer money because nobody cares who anyone sleeps with anymore. Everyone's happy with gay, bi, trans relationships. Just do your own thing and leave us out of it. Is that fair to say?
Well, personally, I don't like fudge. So, yeah, I disagree. I totally disagree with any money being spent on fudge. But you say we're all OK with LGBT, are we? We're actually having this story because is it like a war on money being spent on LGBT? And we know that for the last 6, 7 or 8 years, there's kind of been a whole very kind of toxic dialogue around trans and occasionally around other things like drag. But I think if you go back over the years, 20 odd years ago, then yes, there was a great need for kind of pride and LGBT history months and things, because it made people feel comfortable to come to work as a gay person, as a trans person, as whomever. I think my biggest concern is, has the Taxpayers Alliance looked into all of the other diversities and how much money was spent on them? Like, for example, we are in Black History Month. How much money was spent on Black History Month? How much money is spent on Disability Awareness and History Month? Because there are more people who are disabled than are LGBT, but I quite imagine that they didn't get kind of any disabled zebra crossings or disabled fudge.
Right, but I mean, you talk about, for example, the trans population. It's less than, I think it's 0.16%. I mean, they're a very small minority group in the UK, and yet the argument is that it feels like the case to get them to feel more included in things, I'd argue that we're very welcoming and hospitable in this country, is disproportionate.
I don't know. I mean, if you take I actually can't do the maths that quickly in my head, divide £655,000 into whatever it is, the budget for the NHS and Social Security, which is like somewhere between 150 and 200 billion. The figure's got to be something of the 0.00000 something. It's even lower proportionately. So, yeah, I would argue, I think my biggest argument would be that perhaps the LGBT spending gets the lion's share of the rainbow cake, of all of the diversity cake, and perhaps not enough is spent on other diversity awareness. And I don't know how much comes from within and comes from people wanting to do this. I do think that there needs to be kind of some kind of audit and assessment. Is this value for money? Is it being shown to result in an uptake of more LGBT people joining workforces, feeling comfortable at work?
Yeah. OK, Katie, I get your point. Again, I'd argue that most people I know, in fact, everyone I know, have absolutely no problem with gay, trans, bi, whoever, whatever you want to be. It's just live your life, and they don't understand why it kind of has to be sort of shoved front and centre all the time. But Katie, John Went, appreciate you being with us. Thank you very much. And thank you to the viewers back home for joining me over the past 3 hours. It's been a pleasure. Jubes is up next, and I'm back tomorrow. Have a good evening.
There will be a light breeze in the morning, leading to a warm front. Boxed heat pumps, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Afternoon, welcome to your latest